Chapter 209. The knights playing had never seen such evil undead creatures as ghouls. In some of the more remote areas, there might be some wild, undead creatures. But most of them were low-level skeletons that squeaked as they walked, or some withered corpses that crawled out of the ground. There were even some spirits that had lost their intelligence. As for elite undead creatures like the ghouls, they would not appear naturally without the help of an undead controller. But today, under the influence of the wizard beast plague and the catalysis of the black smoke, the injured demon hunter knights could no longer withstand the powerful witchcraft and were transformed into strong and healthy ghouls. Perhaps it was because the knights' original physique was too strong that the ghouls they transformed into possessed extraordinary strength and physique. Of course, the ghouls' unique agility was also enhanced. They were like a group of skinned humans that were soaked in stinky water for a few days and nights. Their bodies were pale as if they had drowned. Their skin was sticky and slippery, emitting a pungent stench. Under the terrified gazes of the demon hunter knights, the ghouls that had completed their transformation gathered together and launched an attack on the humans around them. The demon hunter knights were caught off guard, and just as they drew their swords, they were knocked to the ground by the pouncing ghouls. Their sharp claws and powerful physique made their attacks exceptionally sharp. The knight's armor that was as thick as a finger was as thin as a piece of paper, easily torn and pierced through by the ghouls. The ghouls crawled on the demon hunter knights, opened their mouths, and bit down on their necks. With just one bite, half of the demon hunter knight's neck was destroyed. His neck was bleeding profusely, his throat was broken, and blood gushed out like a fountain. The demon hunter knights that were attacked immediately lost their ability to fight back. They could only press on the wound on their necks with their hands. Even their last cry for help was swallowed by the blood that flowed out of their mouths and noses. Of course, there were some knights who reacted quickly and drew their rune swords to fight the ghouls that were charging at them. However, the excess fat and useless organs in the ghouls' bodies had all melted away. Under the nourishment of their flesh and blood, their bones had become especially thick and sturdy. Their muscle fibers and tendons had also become as strong as steel wire. As a result, every slash of the demon hunters felt as if they were hacking a particularly tough ancient tree. They were shocked by the difficulty that came from the bottom of their hands. Left with no choice, all the demon hunter knights could only activate the rune arrays on the rune swords. As the bright red and blue runes flowed on the long swords, the knights had a much easier time fighting the ghouls. No matter how tough the skull and body of a ghoul was, it could not compare to the sharpness of a rune weapon. Soon, the demon hunters regained the upper hand and began to force the ghouls to a corner of the campsite. However, in the 15 minutes of chaos, another 40 demon hunter knights had fallen victim to the sharp claws of the ghouls. Every demon hunter knight who witnessed the scene was filled with a towering rage as his flesh was torn apart and his body was bitten until there was not a single unscathed part of his body. These evil magi, they should be torn to shreds. The Knight of Musel strode forward and swung his berserk flame blade horizontally like an indestructible red machete. It flew for more than 50 meters and finally broke a tree that was so thick that it would take 2 people to wrap their arms around it before it completely disappeared. As it flew through the air, the pale and swollen bodies of 7 ghouls were silently cut in half. Black, sticky blood soaked the ground beneath their feet. Don't get entangled with them. Get on the magic colts. Musel's powerful voice came to an abrupt halt, replaced by shock and unconcealable fear. At a corner of the campsite where they stored their magic colts, black smoke had already enveloped the area. Under the influence of the terrifying witchcraft, the demonic colts howled and fell to the ground one after another. Blood was gushing out of every pore on their bodies. Purplish-black blood. For a long time, the demon colts that had accompanied the demon hunter knights day and night were about to die. For a moment, even a knight of radiance like Musel could not help but feel the world spin. Everything in front of him became so blurry. They were knights who had lived their entire lives on horseback and rode their magic colts on the battlefield. Exquisite and sturdy knight armor, exquisite arm shields that could eject energy shields, iron gloves that balance flexibility and defense, iron knee pads, metal boots, as well as rune longswords and rune bows made of special metals. Excluding the small accessories, the rune equipment alone weighed 45 kilograms. With such heavy equipment and the weight of the knights, only the sturdy magic colts could carry them. If they were ordinary war horses, they would probably be half dead from running 2 laps around the campsite, not to mention climbing mountains and ridges. Hence, when the Radiant Knights saw the demonic colts being killed by the evil sorcerer, their vision turned black, and they almost fainted. However, at this moment, mournful howls came from the forest near the campsite. The damned wizard beasts had started attacking again. At some point in time, the stars in the night sky above the high hill were replaced by rolling red clouds. Hundreds of bubbles of various sizes floated and churned inside. Every time one of them burst, a dazzling red glow and scorching flames would spill out. The red clouds churned endlessly, and a large meteor shower was about to take shape in the blink of an eye. The leader of the knights, Charles, staggered 2 steps and spat out a mouthful of blood in front of him. A few of his companions tried to help him up, but he pushed them away with great force. Charles pulled out his long sword with all his might, and a dazzling flame rose instantly. Go quickly. Don't care about the wounded and the magic colts in the campsite. Quick, everyone gather and break out in one direction. Charles's white beard was already dyed red by the blood. He waved his sword and ordered at the top of his lungs. After giving the order, Charles's blood boiled, and a domineering and violent force began to gather crazily. When the force was at its peak, Charles let out a soft whistle that shook the forest, and the flaming longsword in his hand slashed out. A red arc of the sword pierced through the sky and went straight into the roaring and churning red clouds. In the next second, the meteor shower, which was ready to be launched, went out of control. The internal structure of the extremely condensed and violent fire elements was destroyed by the red arc of the sword, and Grimm instantly lost control of the fiery clouds. In the sky, an enormous doomsday volcano erupted, forming a huge pillar of fire that looked like a mushroom cloud. It then turned into a sea of fire and fell into the forest under their feet. In a hidden valley 2 miles away, Grimm was lying in a huge spell formation, vomiting blood. The Lord of the Flames, who was standing beside him, also let out popping sounds of explosion, as if it had suffered a serious backfire from a spell. The usually bright red protective flames on his body were now dim, and there were even some parts of his body that had been completely extinguished, revealing his ugly, uneven body of lava. After a quarter of an hour, Grimm finally broke free from the serious backfire of the spell. He took out large and small bottles of potions, powders, and potions, and swallowed 4 or 5 of them in one go before letting out a long sigh of relief. Damn it! In order to avoid being attacked by the enemy's night battle technique, he had deliberately guided the fiery clouds to an altitude of 200 meters when he activated the meteor shower. Who knew that he would not be able to dodge the terrifying attack of the Radiant Knight? Damn it, damn it, damn it. If the night battle technique had such a long range and such terrifying power, how could Magi fight against knights? Perhaps the Magi would be hacked to death by the swords of the knights while they were still painstakingly chanting spells. Apart from a few simple spells that could be cast in an instant, most spells that were powerful or had a large area of effect required the chanting of spells and the assistance of hand gestures. On the other hand, the night battle technique required the sword to be brandished, and the power gathered was terrifying. Grimm knew that the one who had broken his spell was a Radiant Knight. It was normal for a Grade 2 knight to deal with a Grade 1 magus like him. However, things had been going smoothly for him during this period of time, and Grimm had become a little impatient. Otherwise, with his forbearance and dormant personality, he wouldn't be the first fool to make the first move. Perhaps at this very moment, there were many Magi in the surrounding forests waiting to see him make a fool of himself. Grimm did a simple recuperation and kept the Flame Lord, which had lost a lot of energy. He summoned the Hunter Demon Crocodile and sank into the ground with it. A moment later, A towering pillar of fire ignited within the spell formation, wiping away all traces of his presence. There were too many magi wandering around, and Grimm did not dare to let any of his body parts fall into the enemy's hands. This was especially true for blood. Grimm himself had grasped a dozen or so spells that used his blood, hair, and skin to cast long-range curses on his enemies. If he were to encounter a terrifying magus who specialized in curses, it was said that even the air exhaled by the enemy could be used to gather information. If they were to get their hands on the hair or blood that had fallen off your body, they could perform a large-scale cursing ritual and kill all those who were related to your bloodline. No matter where they were, they would not be able to escape from such a terrifying bloodline curse. Hence, living among the magi, it was best to be cautious and stay in seclusion. Do not offend any magus without good reason. If you really had no choice but to form a blood feud with a magus, remember to kill the other party at the first opportunity. It would be worth it even if you had to pay a huge price. Chapter 2:10. In the dark of the night, countless panicked figures were running in the forest. The demon hunter knights, who once dominated this plain, were now frightened by the mere twang of a bowstring. They took off their heavy armors, threw away their iron greaves, threw away their helmets. Some of the knights even abandoned their rune bows, leaving only a rune sword and the exquisite arm shield that never left them. They were like stray dogs, running quickly in the thick fog of the night. From time to time, someone would trip on the roots of a tree or fall off a cliff that was 4 to 5 meters high. 3 Radiant Knights led the charge, while 4 Radiant Knights led a group of Spellbreaker Knights at the back. The group of people fought and retreated at the same time. They killed a bloody path in the forest and broke out of the encirclement of Gao Gang. At first, all the Demon Hunter Knights could still follow the dazzling flaming sword, but as the howls from the surrounding forest grew denser and closer, everyone's mind was in a mess. Some of the knights were already exhausted, some were covered in wounds, but most of them were gritting their teeth and holding on. They supported each other, encouraging each other, and ran with the crowd with all their might. Of course, there were also some Demon Hunter Knights who had lost their courage and chose to leave the group, disappearing into the dark forest in groups of 2s and 3s. In such a cruel battlefield, most of the sorcerer's attention was attracted by the large group of knights. As long as they could break through the defense line of the wizard beasts, there was a high chance that the scattered Demon Hunter Knights could escape. To be honest, there was a certain logic to this idea. But in a situation where their armor was incomplete and they did not have a magic colt to ride on, and their combat power was greatly reduced, could a small number of Demon Hunter Knights withstand the hordes of wizard beasts and ghouls? This was no doubt a difficult puzzle to solve. In the darkness, there was finally a sorcerer who could not help but make a move. A dark green ball of light the size of a human head shot out from the shadows and landed in the middle of a group of Demon Hunter Knights who were running in panic. The ball of light exploded, and countless glowing acid arrows rained down in all directions. 3 of the knights who were closest to the ball of light did not even have time to put up their energy shields and were riddled with holes by the acid arrows. The heavy body fell to the ground, making a strange sound that made one's teeth ache and legs go weak. In less than 7 seconds, the 3 Demon Hunter Knights were dead, and even their bodies had completely melted into a pool of green liquid. Most of the knights in the outer circle were able to raise their energy shields in time to block the acid arrows. Only one of them was not fast enough, and an acid arrow pierced through his thigh. The injured Demon Hunter Knight dropped his rune longsword and rolled on the ground in pain. The sizzling sound of his flesh being corroded was unbearable. A familiar companion stopped and took out a dagger to protect him. He tore open his trousers and planned to help him cut off the blood and flesh. However, what he saw was a huge wound that had melted into a bloody pulp. His entire right leg had turned green, and the terrifying green color was rapidly spreading upwards. "Can you bear with it? I can't keep this leg." His companion screamed and threw away his dagger. He drew his sword and raised it high, intending to save his life in exchange for his broken leg. However, at this moment, a strange panting and running sound could be heard. A large group of wizard beasts and a few ghouls swarmed over like a swarm of bees. The two panicked people did not even have time to struggle or resist. Their bodies were swallowed by the terrifying figures that came like a tidal wave. In the depths of the forest, a middle-aged sorcerer wearing green leather armor was laughing excitedly. A green ball of light floated in front of his chest. From time to time, a strange green shadow would shoot out from the ball and into the ranks of knights in the distance. Every time, he would successfully kill 2 to 3 demon hunter knights. However, just as he was about to lose control of his excitement, his expression suddenly changed. He fell to the ground and rolled to the side. Almost at the same time, a red flame blade pierced through the air from the darkness. In one breath, it cut through 11 ancient trees before slowly dissipating. The green-armored sorcerer's expression instantly became extremely ugly. If he did not dodge in time, that flame blade would have definitely cut him in half from the waist down. Against such a powerful knight combat technique, even if he cast all of his defensive spells on himself, it would still be useless. The difference in strength was too great. Even an old dog that fell into the water dares to turn around and bite back. Cursing in a low voice, the green-armored sorcerer patted the human bones necklace on his chest. His entire body suddenly became hazy and illusory, and he quickly disappeared from where he stood. However, before he could quickly escape into the darkness of the forest, a dazzling flaming longsword flew over with an ear-piercing whistle. With a thud, it nailed him to the ancient tree behind him. The green-armored sorcerer raised his neck and let out a painful howl. Although a flaming rune sword had pierced through his chest, he did not die. Instead, he quickly grabbed a long green staff out of thin air and planned to escape for the second time. Unfortunately, the energy flames on the rune sword burned his body into ashes in an instant. All that was left was a hideous head and a long green staff that fell to the ground. Charles took firm steps out of the darkness and came to the front of the tree. He pulled out his long sword and picked up the remaining head of the sorcerer. He raised it high and shouted at the distant forest, "Come, come, this is your only fate." In an instant, the forest became much quieter. Countless gazes pierced through the layers of foliage and trees, silently scrutinizing the terrifying head held high by the radiant knight. Just an idiot. Countless people sneered coldly, but in their hearts, they were already on high alert. From the start of the battle until now, the ones who had tormented this 1,000-strong army of demon hunter knights were a bunch of grade 1 sorcerers. Even if the other party had radiant knights that could absolutely crush them, and there were even 7 of them, the sorcerers did not feel the slightest bit of fear. There were even some ambitious sorcerers who were scheming on how to capture a radiant knight. However, at this moment, when they saw the fate of that rash idiot, they could not help but warn themselves again. A grade 2 knight was indeed a grade 2 knight. Even if they were in dire straits, they were still a terrifying powerhouse that could kill them at any time. These sorcerers could act as sinister and cunning wolves in front of the sheep-like demon hunter knights or even the magic breaker knights. However, when faced with the ferocious radiant knights, they could only suffer in silence. The weakness of a grade 2 knight was only relative to a grade 2 sorcerer. To a group of grade 1 sorcerers like them, the other party still had the ability to completely crush them. Understanding this, even if it made them feel a little humiliated, they could still save their lives at the crucial moment. Countless sorcerers looked at this scene in humiliation, their hearts filled with hatred as they gritted their teeth. However, sorcerers who had always advocated using their brains and knowledge to defeat their enemies would not rush forward recklessly. Hence, a few of the stronger grade 1 sorcerers could not help but use their brains. In the dark forest, Grim perched on the back of a demon crocodile hunter, chasing after the team of demon hunter knights at lightning speed. In front of him and behind him, countless earth puppets and wind breath monsters formed a tight blockade, allowing him to keep track of every movement within a 5-mile radius. However, just as he was rushing forward, A wind breath monster at the periphery suddenly transmitted a strange scene to him. Grim thought for a moment and stopped the demon crocodile hunter's advance. He took out his flame scepter and waited silently. Soon, with a crisp crackling sound, a man wrapped in thousands of arcs of lightning appeared in the sky. Blue armor, a striking bald head, and dense runes were etched on his skull. From his appearance, he should be a middle-aged man in his 40s. Grim recognized him. He was a sorcerer from the sorcerer camp who was good at controlling lightning, nicknamed Thunderbird. To be honest, although they were in the same sorcerer camp, they usually wore thick robes or cloaks, and their faces were also covered with spells. Hence, this was the first time Grim had seen the true face of this sorcerer Thunderbird. "You must be Grim, right?" Thunderbird asked coldly. "Go to the Spider Valley, 10 miles away for a meeting. Boss Hyde has invited you to deal with the Radiant Knight together. I've already conveyed the message. It's up to you whether you want to go or not." After saying this, Thunderbird did not stay any longer. With a flash of lightning, he disappeared. Looking up at the lightning scorch marks in the night sky, Grim was slightly surprised. "Meeting?" But then he seemed to understand something and coldly said, "Humph. Finally, someone can't stand the arrogance of a grade 2 knight. Meeting? Looks like he's going to arrange something. Let's go and take a look." Immediately after, the demon crocodile hunter turned around and ran towards the Spider Valley in the distance. Spider Valley. As the name suggested, Spider Valley was a terrifying place where spiders abounded. As soon as one entered the valley, the gloomy forest was filled with dense white spider webs and terrifying spiders crawling between the branches. But strangely, although there were many kinds of spiders, the largest one was only the size of a fist. There is no sign of the calf-size hunter spiders and ghost-faced spiders in the past. Of course, Grim knew this very well. This was because he had personally swept through the Spider Valley, and all the large spiders that had any value had been sent back to the sorcerer camp. So the current Spider Valley was somewhat unworthy of its name. The meeting place was not far from the entrance of the valley. When Grim arrived, there were already 4 people waiting silently: Puppet, Evil Bug, Phantom, and Boss Hyde. Of course, Grim already knew Puppet and Evil Bug, so he focused most of his attention on the latter two. Chapter 211. Although Phantom looked like an enchanting beauty with a sexy body, considering her expertise in illusions, Grim's brain automatically ignored her beauty when he looked at her. Who knew if there was a fat and plump body hidden under her hot and sexy body? Of course, Grim could also use his elemental vision to see through the other party's appearance. However, when facing an opponent of the same rank as him, such invasive probing was undoubtedly an offense, and it was very likely to cause the other party to retaliate. Therefore, when there were other magi around, Grim would purposely turn off his probing ability, only allowing the AI chip to collect information passively. In addition, one of the main reasons why Grim defined her as a female magus and not a witch was that in the magus world, a witch was a special term used to refer to female magi with ancient inheritances. Therefore, the witch was definitely a female magus, but a female magus was not necessarily a witch. The phantom magus in front of him walked the path of an orthodox elemental magus and had nothing to do with the group of witches in the north of the magus continent. There were many magi who had an affinity with illusions, but most of them belonged to the auxiliary type, and not many were suitable for the bloody battlefield. After all, magi nowadays would be embarrassed to go out without an illusionary dispelling wand or concentration necklace. Therefore, with the widespread use of these auxiliary tools, the battle power of magi who specialized in illusions would inevitably be greatly reduced. However, the fact that this phantom magus could be invited today showed that she had her own unique ability in the field of illusions. Otherwise, it would be impossible for her to join this combat team. After a simple look at the phantom magus, Grim shifted most of his attention to Hyde. Hyde was obviously walking the path of an arcane magus. He was more than 2 meters tall and burly, but there were obvious traces of mechanical modification on his body. His left forearm had been chopped off at the elbow and replaced with a bronze-color mechanical arm. There was no skin covering on the surface, and outsiders could even see the metal chains, gears, shafts, and many other indescribable mechanical parts inside. At a glance, this Magus hide's body had been modified countless times. Mechanical arms, mechanical lower limbs, metal eyes, and many strange mechanical equipment attached to the surface of the body. If Grimm were to describe him, Wizard Hide was simply a sophisticated machine. It was just that the surface of the machine had some human flesh attached to it, a robot. Grimm was very curious. If he opened the chest of this sea wizard, would he see warm flesh and blood, or countless crazy gears and connecting rods? For these guys who had gone through cruel body modifications, their strength lay in their energy output far exceeding that of ordinary wizards and their dazzling strange abilities. One had to know that most Magi's bodies were still very fragile. When they were not using witchcraft, they were just a bunch of weak fellows who had to lean on the wall to catch their breath before climbing a few floors. However, once the witchcraft was completed, they would immediately transform into omnipotent gods that could control heaven and earth. Mechanical sorcerers, on the other hand, could use magical machines with magical powers to replace the fragile body organs. In this way, even if they didn't use witchcraft, their bodies would have some natural witchcraft effects, and it would be eternal. Therefore, the mechanical magi paid the price of humans' appearance and enjoyment, but in exchange, they were abnormally strong and strange. It was said that a large number of arcane sorcerers had gathered in the Sky City on the west coast of the Wizard Continent, and most of them were mechanical sorcerers. The Sky City, which was a wizard city floating 10,000 meters above the ground, represented the highest achievement of magical machines. Although Grimm wanted to know more about this wizard hide, there was a slight mechanical buzzing sound, and a strange wave appeared around Hyde's body, preventing him from probing further. Grimm smiled awkwardly and nodded to Hyde and the puppet. He then walked to the side and closed his eyes to wait. He did not keep them waiting for long. After a while, thunder roared in the sky, and lightning flashed. The Thunderbird wizard had also rushed back. Behind him were Bloody Mary and another mysterious Magus hidden in a black robe. Seeing that all the people he invited had arrived, Wizard Hyde cleared his throat and began to introduce with a strange metallic voice. Everyone, the reason why I called you all here today is because of that hateful Radiant Knight. If we let them break out of the encirclement safely, then the price we've paid before will be in vain. Faced with such an old-fashioned opening, all the wizards chose to remain silent. Although the battle was disadvantageous, it was very likely that the family's expansion of the plane would fail. Once everyone was expelled from the plane by the local natives, the resources and rewards promised by the family would be gone. However, if the wizards here were forced into the battlefield as cannon fodder, they would only work and not put in any effort. They would prioritize their own lives first. Therefore, Wizard Hyde, who was familiar with the nature of wizards, immediately changed the topic. I'm going to launch a sneak attack on that Radiant Knight. If everyone here is willing to participate, then stay behind and continue the discussion. If anyone is not willing to participate, you can leave now. The only thing I can guarantee is that once the plan succeeds, everyone will be able to get the things they want the most. Finally, there was a slight change in the expressions on the wizards' faces. As wizards, they adhered to the principle of fair exchange of benefits. If there was no benefit, or if it was too dangerous, they would instinctively choose to avoid it. Launching a sneak attack on a Rank 2 knight was definitely a dangerous mission that exceeded their capabilities. However, if they could get the resources and knowledge they wanted the most, taking some risks seemed to be acceptable. Everyone's eyes flashed slightly, as if they were silently calculating something. Wizard Hyde looked around with his mechanical eyes and waited for a moment. Seeing that no one left, he finally relaxed a little. Everyone here was a powerful wizard that he had carefully selected. Every one of them had a strange witchcraft ability that others would not be able to achieve. Therefore, if any of them left, it would have a big or small impact on his plan. If necessary, he would have to lower the threshold of his selection and find a replacement from the remaining wizards. Since no one left voluntarily, that means everyone is willing to participate in this plan. All right, then let's discuss each other's requirements. No wizard was willing to make such a private matter public. So what followed next was a one-on-one discussion between Wizard Hyde and each participant. Hyde's lips moved slightly, but no sound could be heard. It was obvious that he was secretly talking to a wizard. After waiting for about a quarter of an hour, Grimm finally heard a prompt from the AI chip in his mind. A special spiritual force channel has been detected. Initiator, Wizard Hyde. Requesting host's instructions to connect? Connect. In the next second, Wizard Hyde's peculiar metallic voice sounded in Grimm's mind. Hello, Wizard Grimm. Time is of the essence, so let's get straight to the point. If I invite you to participate in this dangerous hunt, what do you want? Grimm hesitated for a moment, then slowly said, I want to obtain the part of the knowledge about the fusion of rune energy and life energy. This request is a little difficult. After all, the complete knowledge about the fusion of energy could only be grasped by the huge force behind them. Even if we killed them and obtained some incomplete knowledge about the runes, it would still be extremely difficult for us to deduce the next part of the fusion of energy. If I'm not wrong, Lord Forgan captured a Radiant Knight alive last time. I'm sure we can get a lot of their internal secrets from his brain. Wizard Hyde, who was far away, twitched his body in astonishment. His red mechanical eyes carefully sized up Grimm again. I have no right to divulge any information about the camp. If I can't directly obtain the knowledge about the fusion of energy, I would also like to know how to obtain it. In other words, I want to know who else in the Knight's continent has the complete knowledge about the fusion of energy. Of course, it'd be best if it's someone I can deal with. You really are a far-sighted magus. If I'm not wrong, other than the rare resources in this plane, the most valuable thing is the knowledge about runes. The knowledge about the fusion of energy that you asked for, Lord Sarubo has already defined it as a rank 3 strategic resource. It will never appear in your hands. As for the mortals who have this knowledge, although they are not under our control, you will still need to hunt for them yourself. I can only provide a list of the corresponding members. That's enough. I accept this condition. In the next second, a contract formed from the power of the will appeared in Grimm's mind. The AI chip dutifully scanned the contract in detail. After eliminating the language logic, magic patterns, and loopholes in the contract, it sent the detailed contract to Grimm. Grimm gave it a quick glance. It was exactly the same as what he had just discussed. Only then did he carefully leave his spell imprint on the contract. After another half an hour, Wizard Hyde signed the contract with the rest of the wizards. With the restriction of the contract, everyone's attitude became a lot friendlier. In order to make it easier for them to coordinate with each other, Wizard Hyde let everyone briefly introduce their own witchcraft abilities. To encourage everyone to speak, Wizard Hyde was the first to speak. Hyde, mechanical wizard, expert in close combat in a small area. His spells include energy light blades and sharp awls. The second one to speak was Razor. Thunderbird, elemental wizard, expert in lightning spells. Currently, he has mastered Cloud Storm, lightning bombardment, and lightning teleportation. Marionette, bloodline wizard, expert in transforming plants. Currently, he has mastered puppet thread and would substitute. Demonic worm, bloodline wizard, expert in transforming insects. Currently, he has mastered insect repelling, split attack, and damage sharing. Phantom, elemental wizard, expert in illusion spells. Currently, he has mastered dream environment and dream dissociation. Fire demon, elemental wizard, expert in fire spells. Currently, he has mastered flame, demon transformation, and flame boundary. Blood lady, bloodline wizard, expert in blood spells. Currently, he has mastered bat, demon transformation, and blood-sucking attack. Evil shadow, elemental wizard, expert in curse spells. Of course, no one would reveal their trump cards in a situation like this. Therefore, the introductions were very vague. However, since Wizard Hyde had gathered everyone together, he must have more or less understood everyone's situation. Chapter 2:12. The massacre in the forest continued. However, the battlefield had shifted from Gaogang to 30 miles away. This was a road of death paved with the corpses of wizard beasts. It left an indelible mark in the hearts of every demon hunter knight. At this point in the battle, both sides were having a hard time holding on. On the human side, there were less than 200 demon hunter knights who could make it from Gaogang to here, and all of them were injured. The pressure on their minds and bodies had reached their limits, and they were on the verge of collapse. On the other hand, the sorcerers had lost nearly 30,000 wizard beasts since the beginning of the battle. This was all the wizard beasts that the sorcerers had modified in the past month. However, after sacrificing almost all of their wizard beasts, the sorcerers had only reaped a bunch of insignificant demon hunter knights. The only thing worth mentioning was the heads of the magic breaker knights. The magic breaker knights had suffered heavy losses. 34 of them had charged into the forest, but only 15 had managed to escape with the team. The rest had turned into skeletons, becoming a delightful achievement for the sorcerers. However, the 7 Radiant Knights, who were the higher-ups of the knights, were still standing strong. Whether it was the continuous attacks of the wizard beasts and ghouls, or the sneak attacks of the sorcerers, they could not shake the rock-solid defense of the Radiant Knights. It was the black smoke that filled the jungle. Apart from making them spit out 2 mouthfuls of blood and become a little dispirited, there were no other signs of it. The Radiant Knights had an enviable defense against this terrifying fungus that could destroy the balance of the runic energy in their bodies. Of course, it could also be that their bodies could withstand this degree of damage and still maintain their combat power. It could be said that even the Magic Breaker Knights and the Demon Hunter Knights were unable to continue halfway. They staggered as they followed the faintly glowing figures of the Radiant Knights. Their bodies were in turmoil, and they were in a mess. The remaining runic energy, under the influence of the black smoke, destroyed their internal organs in a frenzy, causing them to vomit blood every time they walked. It was a purplish-black bloody paste filled with broken organs. The Magic Breaker Knights had a better physique, so they managed to retain some combat power. However, he no longer dared to channel the rune energy into his body. As a result, the rune sword in his hand once again became an ordinary longsword, losing its sharpness and fearsomeness. The Demon Hunter Knights, on the other hand, had completely lost their ability to fight back. They were like plague victims, following the group like the Walking Dead. They had lost the ability to resist and could only rely on the protection of the Spellbreaker Knights and the Radiant Knights. Perhaps it was because of this that the sorcerers commanded their wizard beasts and ghouls to stop massacring the demon hunters. Instead, they tried to inflict as much damage as they could on the demon hunters. However, they did not kill the demon hunters, allowing the heavily injured demon hunters to remain in their ranks. This undoubtedly slowed down their pace even more. The 7 Radiant Knights and the 15 Magic Breaker Knights were the only defense for the 200 demon hunters. Every time a large number of wizard beasts swarmed over, the 7 Radiant Knights would have to fight on the front lines, using their strong bodies and terrifying combat skills to destroy the enemies. The 15 Magic Breaker Knights, on the other hand, guarded the demon hunters, using their thin bodies and dim rune swords to kill the enemies, slowly whittling down their numbers. It could be said that after such a long time of preparation and effort, the demon hunters were exhausted, and their combat power had fallen to the bottom. It was precisely because of this that when Wizard Hyde made the suggestion, no one immediately rejected it. Instead, they became eager to try it out. The first wave of attacks was naturally from a few elemental sorcerers, especially Grimm and Thunderbird. After all, among all the elemental sorcery, fire sorcery was recognized as the most suitable for large-scale killing. Although Thunderbird's lightning sorcery was not weak, the lightning came and went quickly. In terms of derivative damage, it was far inferior to the fire sorcery. Therefore, when Thunderbird and Grimm started chanting spells at the same time on a hill a mile away from the demon hunters, the sky in the distance once again turned into an apocalyptic scene. Above them were rolling red clouds with raging flames, and below them was a raging thunderstorm. When the fiery meteors whistled down, dragging long tails of black smoke behind them. The forest where the knights were in had been destroyed by the violent lightning. There were scorched dead trees everywhere with black smoke rising in spirals. A few radiant knights urged the demon hunters to leave the area where the spells were wreaking havoc, and, at the same time, they used their flame blades to cut down every falling meteor. Although they had done their best, there were still some fiery meteors falling on the demon hunters. Outside the core of the fiery meteors was a solid lava shell, and inside it was liquid lava with a temperature of more than 3,000 degrees Celsius and abundant fire elements. When they fell to the ground, apart from creating a huge crater, the outer shell of the lava would suddenly explode, and the violent fire elements would roll up the bone-piercing magma and shoot out in all directions. Without the necessary energy protection, even the physique of the Magic Breaker Knights would not be able to withstand the terrifying lava rain and the terrifying flame flow. As for the demon hunters, they were destined to die the moment they were sucked into the falling meteors. What was more terrifying was that even after the attack, the fiery magma had cooled down and outsiders would not be able to find their remains in the fire. They were either burnt to a crisp, incinerated into ashes, or solidified in the molten rocks. It was a classic case of not even leaving a corpse behind, as the demon hunter's physical strength was at its limit. Even though they only needed to move 20 to 30 meters to escape the range of the terrifying spells, they could only struggle and wail in the sea of fire. They would only fall to the ground when they exhausted their last bit of life. The Radiant Knights and the spell-breaking knights charged into the sea of fire, grabbed them, and threw them out of the sea of fire with all their might. They wailed and wailed in agony, their hands trembling as they reached out their hands for help. However, at this moment, under the guidance of the sorcerers, the flaming clouds in the sky slowly moved towards the area where the demon hunters were gathered. Charles looked at the scene in front of him with widened eyes, and his ears were filled with the wails of the demon hunters before they died. He turned around angrily and was about to slash that damned sorcerer to death with his sword. However, at this moment, a tall figure blocked his way. "You stay here and lead the others to break out of the encirclement." "I'll go." Muscle grabbed his arm and shouted in a hoarse voice. He then turned around and rushed into the forest. A mile of mountain road was nothing to an angry Radiant Knight. When the meteor shower in the sky had just passed the middle stage and was about to turn into the final stage, the angry Muscle quickly approached the mountain where the spellcaster was. Even without Wizard Hyde's message, Grim and Thunderbird had each used their own methods to detect Muscle's approach. Facing a furious Grade 2 Radiant Knight, the two sorcerers did not dare to let their guard down. The moment Muscle approached the mountaintop, they had already tried to stop the spells from afar. Muscle rushed to the top of the mountain in one breath. When he saw the two vigilant, evil sorcerers, he immediately realized something. Perhaps he had already thought about this problem before he came here. That was why Muscle stopped his impulsive old friend and came by himself. Looking at the scene he was most worried about had finally become reality. Muscle was still fearless. He calmly walked out of the dark forest. "Tell your men to come out." Muscle waved his sword lightly, and the scorching flames once again engulfed the entire blade. Even if he was exhausted, even if he was covered in smoke, even if he was surrounded by powerful enemies, when the rune energy surged crazily in his body again, the Radiant Knight Muscle held his sword horizontally. He still had a domineering aura that could send chills down people's spines. However, this had no effect on wizards whose minds were already so tough that they could not be shaken by anything. Along with a sneer, the evil worm, Hyde, Marionette, and Mary appeared in the forest behind Muscle and surrounded him in a triangular formation. Phantom and Evil Shadow were still nowhere to be seen. Both of them were support-type spells. Hiding in the dark and launching sneak attacks was far more threatening than launching a direct attack on the battlefield. Although the one caught in the net was not the knight leader they had expected, he was still a Grade 2 knight. Therefore, they did not slack off and immediately launched a fierce attack according to their previous agreement. 6 wizards and 6 single-target attack spells engulfed Muscle's figure in an instant. After the first round of attacks, everyone quickly moved away from their original positions. As they changed positions, they quickly prepared for the second round of attacks. With the power of their attacks, it was impossible to kill a Grade 2 knight in one round. Therefore, they had long since prepared to slowly kill their opponent. As expected, a swift and violent flame blade flew horizontally across the ground, passing by Grimm's side by a hair's breadth. A row of trees behind him was cut into burning torches. In the next second, Muscle forcefully rushed out of the violent elemental whirlpool against his energy shield. Wizard Hyde roared and dashed forward to meet Muscle's charge. As the only mechanical wizard present, a branch of arcane wizards, Hyde could temporarily act as a meat shield when there were no body refinement wizards around. As he rapidly approached his opponent, Hyde's thick left mechanical arm began to tremble slightly, activating a semicircular energy light shield to protect his body. The front end of his right mechanical arm suddenly began to spin rapidly, then turned into a violent sharp cone that shot towards Muscle's chest. Without a sound, the skin on Hyde's back split open, and 5 or 6 palm-sized discs spun and flew out, rapidly attacking Muscle's ribs from both sides. Chapter 2:13. However, these tricks were useless against a Grade 2 knight. Without using any knight battle skills, Musser simply chopped and swung his sword to shatter the rotating blades. Then, he calmly swept his sword across the flying awl that was coming at his chest. Strangely, the sharp awl shattered upon contact, instantly breaking into dozens of smaller awls that rapidly pierced towards various parts of Muscle's body. Under normal circumstances, such a simple attack would not have been able to harm Muscle in the slightest. Unfortunately, today was clearly not Muscle's lucky day. Muscle roared, and his sword broke through the barrage of bullets. He rushed out of the encirclement and slashed heavily at the energy barrier in front of Hyde. With just one slash, the energy barrier shattered into pieces, and Hyde was sent flying into the forest, screaming miserably. Muscle grunted as 4 dark red blood spots appeared on his body at the same time. Even though those damned, sharp awl fragments had pierced into his flesh, they were still spinning. Furthermore, they were constantly releasing some strange poison, causing him to lose his sense of the flesh around him. Muscle patted his chest heavily. Under the pressure of the violent chi, the 4 fragments shot out again with puffing sounds. Along with them came streams of sticky white pus, and there was a faint smell of bitter almonds in the air. Muscle simply dealt with his wounds. Just as he was about to take advantage of the situation to rush over and kill that detestable magus, he suddenly felt his legs tighten. Thorny vines had shot out from the ground and coiled around him. There was a terrifying snake head at the end of each bramble vine's tentacle, and it was currently drilling into the greaves on his legs, causing them to creak. Muscle suddenly raised his head, and his gaze instantly fell on the magus at the edge of the forest, who looked and behaved like a puppet. At this moment, he was silently sticking close to a large tree. His legs had already sunk into the soil, and his hands were inserted into the trunk of the tree. One could faintly hear the sound of sucking. Taking advantage of the opportunity when the Radiant Knight was trapped by the puppet, the surrounding magi did not hesitate to launch their most ferocious attacks. Not far away, the demonic insect Indeek raised his right hand horizontally. A huge black hole suddenly appeared in his jet-black palm, and countless terrifying flying insects flew out with a buzz, swarming toward the Radiant Knight. Within the swarm of flying insects, there were a dozen strange beetles with black shells, green wings, and liver mortis spots on their backs. Bloody Mary did not recklessly charge at the Tier 2 Radiance Knight. Instead, she unfurled her bat wings and pulled her blood-red longbow to its fullest. Instantly, the violent and ferocious blood energy around her reached its peak. There was a crisp sound. The arrow left the bowstring. In the sky, a pillar of white lightning that was as thick as a bucket came crashing down. Its target was also the Radiant Knight, who was trapped in place and unable to move. In the blink of an eye, the puppet trapped the enemy, and the 3 magi used their killing moves at the same time, immediately putting Muscle in a dangerous situation. Faced with the simultaneous attacks from the front, back, and top of his head, Musser raised a rune sword in his hand high. When the energy in his body was brewed to the maximum, he let out a loud roar and stabbed the sword into the ground. In the next second, the berserk and unstoppable runic energy seeped into the ground and then exploded. What kind of power would a grade 2 knight have when he went all out? Grim, who was standing 50 meters behind Muscle, instantly felt the elemental vision in front of him turn bright red. All sorts of energy data projected by the AI chip rose rapidly, and the ear-piercing warning of danger did not stop for even a moment. These abstract data could not even fully describe the scene in front of Grim. The earth was cracking, the forest was trembling, and the entire sky was dyed blood red. On the ground, fine cracks like a spider's web quickly spread outwards with a rune sword at the center. However, the speed at which they spread was obviously not as fast as the few thick cracks in the ground. Terrifying, bottomless ravines twisted and twisted on the ground as they extended outwards. Wherever they passed, ancient trees toppled, the earth cracked, and huge pillars of dust shot up into the sky. On the ground, a ring-shaped violent hurricane swept through the area like an invisible razor, flattening everything on the ground. Countless grass, mud, and withered leaves were swept up by the hurricane and scattered into the surrounding forest. With Muscle at the center, there were no plants or vegetation within a radius of 100 meters. Even a layer of the ground had been flattened. 100 meters away, countless tall, ancient trees fell outwards in a ring, perfectly displaying the terrifying energy contained in the violent strike of a radiant knight. Under such a destructive force, no one's attack could break through the invisible barrier of energy. When the violent tide of energy gradually began to recede, everything in the field returned to everyone's sight. The previously tight circle of attacks had now become sparse and sparse. The slender and light Mary was obviously not known for her strength, so she was directly swept away by the first wave of energy and disappeared without a trace. The demonic insect wasn't much better off. Not only was it unable to stand, it could only transform into its insect form and stab its limbs into the soil. Even the flying insect subordinates it summoned were blown into thin threads. Only a dozen or so carrion beetles struggled together, forming an evil beetle shield to block the subsequent wave of energy attacks. It must be known that in that moment, other than the raging waves of energy, there were also countless scattered fragments of energy. These fragments of energy, comparable to the sharpness of divine weapons, were hidden in the tide-like energy waves and were enough to dismember any creature caught in them. Puppet, who had taken on the brunt of the energy attack, was in an even more miserable state. Not only were the roots on its legs broken, even Succubus' body, which was exposed on the ground, was riddled with holes. Visible to the naked eye, there were 3 to 4 penetrating wounds on its woody body. As for the sporadic wounds, they were even more densely packed. After suffering such heavy injuries, Puppet's life force instantly fell to rock bottom. At this moment, the insufferably domineering Muscle had just pulled out his long sword from the soil. His majestic body stood ramrod straight, and his gaze landed on the few miserable magi. A trace of a disdainful smile appeared on his face. "You scoundrels who only know how to hide. Now I'll let you." Muscle's voice was muffled like thunder, but halfway through his sentence, his expression suddenly changed, and he spat out a mouthful of purplish-black blood. In the next moment, even his body began to tremble. A few magi had sharp eyes, and immediately discovered some fragments of internal organs in the blood. A sinister laughter rang out from outside the field, mixed with the sound of metal clanging. You know that this forest has been covered by the terrifying poisonous fungus, yet you still dare to absorb the runic energy into your body so fiercely? The ignorant are indeed fearless. Now you've suffered from the energy backlash, haven't you? How about it? How many more attacks like that can you unleash? Here, The more ferocious the energy you stimulate, the faster you die. Kakik, I think you'd better obediently lie down and wait for your death. Metal clanged, and a robot pushed away the sand, branches, and leaves on its body. It emerged from the ground and strode towards Muscle, who was leaning on his sword. The rest of the Magi also appeared around him, trapping him in the middle. Attack! Following Hyde's shout, everyone moved in unison, and another wave of ferocious attacks engulfed the knight's body. 2 miles away, Charles had just led the group out of the encirclement. As they gathered in a sparse forest for a short rest, Charles suddenly stood up from the mountain rock and gazed into the distance at a certain place behind him. There, a vast and surging energy aura was erupting. This aura was so familiar that he almost subconsciously called it out. Muscle. With the strength of a rank 2 knight, he would not normally use such an extravagant method of energy eruption. This kind of energy attack seemed to have a wide area of effect, but it was extremely wasteful in terms of energy. It was far less destructive than a knight's battle technique of condensing energy. This kind of grand and imposing knight battle technique could only be liked by knights who had just grasped the method of using energy. However, Radiant Knights knew that a Scarlet Flame attack that covered 10 meters was far less powerful than a sword strike that was condensed with energy. Muscle was a veteran Radiant Knight, and it was impossible for him not to understand this principle. Yet, he had made such a childish mistake. This meant that he was either facing an enemy several times stronger than him, or that he could no longer control the energy in his body. No matter which of the two situations it was, it showed how bad his current situation was. You guys lead the group and continue forward. I'll bring Muscle back. Before the violent shout had even dissipated, Charles had already disappeared from the scene. A pair of strange energy wings extended from Charles's back, which also gave him the ability to fly short distances. Tall, ancient trees whizzed past him, and the dense branches slapped against his face and body. He had already poured most of his energy into the energy wings and did not have any extra energy to protect himself. Thus, he did his best to widen his eyes and clumsily adjusted his body as he charged forward, trying his best to avoid the trees. As for the dense branches and vines, he no longer had the energy to dodge them and could only rely on his strong body to resist them. With the ability to fly, he could cover a distance of 2 kilometers in the blink of an eye. A moment later, the barren battlefield appeared in his field of vision. On top of a small hill that had nearly half collapsed, Muscle's hunched body was curled up into a ball, and he was doing his best to resist the surrounding magic attacks that were like a storm. Flames, lightning, blood arrows, wooden spikes, sharp awls, all sorts of terrifying magic rained down on Muscle's body, almost turning him into a sieve. Charles's eyes were wide open, and he let out a violent roar. The energy wings retracted, and he instantly landed beside Muscle. He swung the large sword in his hand, and a ferocious and violent force swept out, annihilating all the attacks and the surroundings in the bright red sword light. Muscle, hold on, I'm going to... Charles swung the long sword with one hand, shattering the incoming magic attacks, and picked up Muscle with the other, intending to rush out of the battlefield. Chapter 214. Charles had already imagined all sorts of possible encounters when he had charged into the fray. He had never dared to underestimate the craftiness of Magi. Unfortunately, the current situation had exceeded the limits of his imagination. He had actually been attacked by Muscle. Muscle's eyes were wide open, his gaze unfocused. Tears of blood flowed from the corners of his eyes, and he could not help but let out strange sounds. His hands were emitting intense energy rays, which had already sunk deep into Charles's waist. Some unknown things were continuously being injected into him. Charles endured the intense pain and pressed his left hand against Muscle's chest. Dense energy rays began to gather rapidly. As long as he exerted some strength, he would be able to easily shake off Muscle's entanglement. However, looking at Muscle's familiar face and sensing the weak heartbeat under his palm, Charles found it difficult to activate the power he had gathered. This was an old comrade he had known for over 40 years. Although his mind had been bewitched by the evil magi and he had become a lackey, his life force had not been extinguished. If Charles were to blast him away with an energy explosion, with Muscle's weakened body, he would probably be snuffed out with his own hands. At the thought of this, Charles could not help but tear up. His palm, which was pressed against his old friend's chest, was trembling. Muscle had probably been defeated and captured, and the scene of him being besieged by the Magi was simply a rehearsed show. Everything had been to lure him into a trap. At this moment, Charles finally saw it clearly. His old friend Muscle's legs had been pierced by thorns, and he was firmly locked in place. 7 or 8 strange, transparent threads had pierced out from the ground and pierced into various parts of his body. This was probably the reason why he had lost control of his actions. Using Muscle's hands that had pierced into Charles's body as a bridge, waves of unknown things were constantly entering his body. Some of them were tiny living creatures that were crazily gnawing at his flesh and organs. Some of them were cursed halos that kept erupting in his body, causing his consciousness and physique to rapidly weaken. Apart from that, the evil magi around the battlefield did not hold back at all. Powerful spells rained down on them, not caring if they would accidentally injure Muscle, who was on their side. Just as Charles hesitated for a moment, the rain-like witchcraft had already drowned him in Muscle. The violent and ferocious elemental explosion and the rampaging elemental wave continued to erupt, turning this place into a living hell. Even a Tier 2 Radiance Knight would find it hard to endure such a powerful elemental corrosion. So with a painful roar that shook the forest, Knight Charles rushed out of the energy storm vortex like a mad tiger, and his left hand was still tightly holding Muscle's body. Yes, after the previous round of ferocious attacks, the Radiant Knight Musa, who was on the verge of death, had finally reached the end of his life. His heart had stopped beating. His body, which had lost the protection of his energy, was corroded by the violent elemental waves and was riddled with holes. He no longer looked human. Not to mention Muscle. Even Knight Charles looked extremely miserable at the moment. His left eye had been blinded by the explosion, and blood was gushing out of the huge bloody hole. His body looked as if he had just been fished out of a meat grinder, and there were terrifying crisscrossing wounds all over his body. As soon as he rushed out of the energy vortex, he let go of the rune longsword and stabbed his right hand into the flesh of his waist. With a dull thud, a small-scale energy explosion occurred in his body. Purplish-black blood and minced meat splattered everywhere. When Charles pulled his bloody hand out of the bloody hole in his waist, he was actually holding a strange beetle that was constantly hissing and struggling. Although the strange beetle was temporarily stunned by Charles's energy explosion, it became active again the moment it left his body. It kept hissing and gnawing at Charles's palm in a frenzy. Charles roared and clenched his 5 fingers together. The strange beetle finally could not withstand the energy explosion of a Tier 2 knight and was instantly crushed into a ball of blood paste. Following the death of the strange beetle, the muffled groan of the demonic insect, Indic, came from the distant forest. It was obvious that the death of the larvae of the carrion beetle had caused him a considerable backlash. The energy explosion just now was obviously too much for Charles's heavily injured body to bear. The flesh on both sides of his ribs had been blasted away by the energy explosion in his body. After swaying a few times, he finally could not help but kneel down. The heavy injuries on his body, as well as the curse that was difficult to get rid of, were the last straw that broke the camel's back. The backlash from using a large amount of rune energy just now, in addition to the day and night of squeezing his body's potential, made him finally unable to suppress the injuries in his body. Kneeling on the ground, the world before his eyes spun and swayed continuously. The intense pain from his body frequently assaulted his mind, and the impact caused his consciousness to gradually blur. "You evil wizards!" Charles's damaged lips moved slightly, as if he wanted to use the last bit of his strength to scold the enemy. Unfortunately, His broken body did not allow him to continue. Charles's head tilted, and just like that, he fainted. It had to be said that the body of a Tier 2 Radiant Knight, which had been immersed in rune energy for a long time, had indeed surpassed the limits of a human. His body was broken beyond recognition, and there was not much flesh left between his chest and abdomen. Most of his internal organs had already turned into a bloody paste. But even with such terrifying injuries, he still did not die. The strength of a Tier 2 Radiant Knight could be seen from this. However, his injuries were so severe that even if the sorcerers did not attack him, his broken body had already lost the ability to repair itself. Sooner or later, he would reach the end of his life. Many sorcerers gathered around Charles, and after checking his condition, they could not help but have a heated discussion. At this point in the war, the harvest of the 2 Radiant Knights had already satisfied everyone, especially the leader of the Radiant Knights, who was even more of a rare character. Moreover, at this time, news came from the front line that the demon hunters in the camp at the edge of the forest had already set off in large numbers and were rapidly approaching. Therefore, the sorcerers who had fought hard for a night could not help but think of retreating. This day and night of hard fighting had caused the demon hunters to suffer heavy losses, and more than 2/3 of their forces had been lost. However, the sorcerers did not fare well either. The wizard beast army that they had painstakingly built was almost completely destroyed, and even one sorcerer had fallen. If not for the group of elite ghouls and the 2 Radiant Knights, this battle could be said to be a huge loss. Therefore, when they saw a large number of elite demon hunters suddenly enter the forest, the sorcerers could only command the remaining wizard beast army to retreat. Near a call 20 miles deep into the forest, the surging reinforcements converged with the remaining wizard beast army. When Winsoul rushed into the forest on his demonic colt, he was immediately shocked by the tragic scene before him. Once upon a time, the majestic and mighty demon hunters were the greatest pride of this world. Whenever there was news of evil wreaking havoc, this group of proud demon hunters would mount their demonic colts and travel thousands of miles to fight bravely. Wherever they went, it could be said that evil was repelled and darkness was extinguished. It was because of their generosity, aggressive attitude, and enthusiasm that the entire plain presented a scene of prosperity. Even in the 2 rare wars against evil in history, it was more about the glorious deeds of the demon hunter knights who fought bravely to be the first in slaying the evil. Those evildoers might be able to wreak havoc for a while, but once the proud and honorable demon hunter knights found them, they would vanish in a thin air in an instant, and the world would return to its former glory. However, the scene that he had witnessed today had deeply shocked Winsoul. In the dark forest, the demon hunters who had abandoned their armor were swaying left and right. On their bodies, there were traces of terrifying wizard beast bites on their faces. Their eyes were empty and numb, and they clustered around each other. Even when they saw the arrival of reinforcements, there was no expression of surprise, or anything similar on their faces. If not for the slight rise and fall of their chests, Winsoul would have thought that he was looking at a group of clay statues carved from a mixture of blood and mud. Finally, a familiar face covered in mud and blood appeared in front of Winsoul. He could not help but stop his demonic colt. "Jose, how did you suffer the attack? How did you suffer such heavy losses in just one day? Where's Charles?" A series of questions were thrown at him, but in return, the Radiant Knight, named Jose, only responded weakly. "Gone, all gone," Jose murmured. "They're all gone." Hearing his hoarse and mournful cry, the exhausted and numb remaining army in the forest finally began to cry, and it quickly spread. A wave of grief, anger, and even deep sorrow rose in the forest, and all the reinforcements could not help but shed tears. It was too tragic. It was simply too tragic. A day ago, it was a team of nearly 1,000 demon hunters who stepped into the forest passionately. But now, after searching the entire call, including the Radiant Knights and the Magic-Breaking Knights, there were only 172 of them. Moreover, these knights who were lucky enough to escape were covered in wounds, physically and mentally exhausted, and their spirits were at rock bottom. Windsoul could not even see the pride and glory of being a demon hunter knight in them. Not to mention the ordinary demon hunters, even the powerful radiant knights looked haggard and haggard at the moment. Their internal and external injuries were so severe that it made one's heart palpitate. Windsoul looked at the dark forest in the distance. With his powerful war instincts, he could sense the presence of the enemy. If it were in the past, he would have led his men into the darkness and killed wantonly, using the blood of the enemy to reignite the passion of his companions. But at this moment, the dark forest had become unprecedentedly terrifying. Even a Grade 2 Radiant Knight like him could not help but feel a little afraid. Perhaps the best thing to do is to wait for new reinforcements to arrive before conducting a large-scale search, he thought silently. Chapter 215. Dragon Cliff. For the humans living on the Night Continent, Dragon Cliff was a rather taboo name. Although there was no shortage of bards describing the magnificence of Dragon Cliff in taverns and inns of all sizes on the continent, there was no shortage of them foaming at the mouth. But as for the location of Dragon Cliff, most people only heard about it from hearsay. There was not the slightest bit of credibility. It was said that it was where the dragons lived and multiplied. It was said that there were mountains of wealth there. It was said that it was the burial place of countless arrogant people who wanted to challenge the dragons and become dragon knights. But where was Dragon Cliff? No one could know. It was a secluded valley in the boundless mountains. This undulating mountain range stretched out in all directions. There were broad and tall trees on it. The green forest covered a vast area of thousands of kilometers. Towering mountains could be seen everywhere, and terrifying deep ravines covered every corner of the land. Because of the dense forest and the numerous beasts, it was one of the dangerous places that humans could not set foot in. However, in the center of the beautiful and secluded valley, there was a towering cliff with dragon roars. It was the legendary majestic Dragon Cliff that no one could find. It was the afternoon when the sun was the brightest. The great green dragon, O'Farrell, had just had a full meal in the outer forest. It flapped its huge membranous wings and flew around the Dragon Valley once before landing beside a small lake. Some herbivores, such as bison, antelope, and blue zebra that were drinking by the lake were scared and ran away. They vigilantly watched the uninvited green dragon from afar. It was not until they found out that it had eaten its fill that they became much more relaxed. After lying by the lake and drinking the clear lake water, O'Farrell curled up its membranous wings in satisfaction and paced on the grass by the lake with its hands and feet. The weather was so beautiful that it could not help but want to have a good sleep. However, as a guard of the Dragon Valley, it also had the task of guarding the entrance of the Dragon Valley from foreign invasion. So it could only snort discontentedly and spit out a cloud of light green smoke from its nostrils. Only then did it manage to dispel its heavy sleepiness. Suddenly, O'Farrell stood up and raised its nose to sniff a few times. In the natural fragrance of the grass, it seemed to detect a trace of foreign aura that did not belong to the Dragon Valley. It was a human. Moreover, it was a familiar human. O'Farrell's thick hind legs kicked hard, and its heavy body bounced off the ground. Then, under the powerful flapping of its huge membranous wings, it left the ground with difficulty and flew towards the entrance of the valley. The dragon's body was too large, and it would be difficult for them to fly after landing on the ground. Therefore, they preferred to build their nests on the top of cliffs that were difficult for outsiders to approach. Over there, they had a wide field of vision, and it was very convenient for them to pounce on their enemies from above. After flying across the grassland for 10 to 20 miles, O'Farrell saw a familiar human figure at the entrance of the Dragon Valley. This was a tall and burly human man. He had shoulder-length golden hair, a golden headband, golden armor, golden bracelets, and golden combat boots. From top to bottom, from inside to outside, this strong human emitted the extravagance and vulgarity of a nouveau riche. All the ornaments and clothes on his body shone with a golden light, making it hard to look directly at them. However, it was this vulgar human man who exuded a powerful aura that was difficult for outsiders to reach. Even when the green dragon, feral, whose body was as large as a hill, let out a loud dragon roar and swooped down at him, he did not have the slightest intention of dodging. Instead, he opened his arms and took the initiative to welcome him. With a dull thud, the huge green dragon landed lightly on the ground, creating a shallow pit that was 1 meter deep and 3 meters in diameter on the green grass. Only then did it hug the strong human affectionately. In fact, the so-called embrace was just the green dragon reluctantly placing its head in front of the strong human man, allowing him to hug it. Willis, why do you have a time to come to the Dragon Valley? Could it be that the human king is willing to let you go? Although the green dragon had tried his best to control his voice, it still caused the surrounding void to buzz. Oh, Feral, it's a long story. I'll chat with you when I have time. Right now, I want to see Chief Riceland. Please help me pass the message. The green dragon hesitated. Willis, after you sent the heavily injured Lysana back 2 days ago, the chief has become very angry. A few elders are trying to save poor Lysana. I'm afraid. Oh, Feral, I'm also a member of the Dragon Valley. Has the chief banned me from entering? Willis asked loudly. Once he was angry, his domineering aura as a grade 4 holy paladin was something even a grade 3 green dragon could not withstand. That's not true. The green dragon's long face showed a hint of awkwardness. All right then, I'll give it a try. As for whether the chief will see you or not, I can't guarantee that. With that, the green dragon, Feral, turned around and opened his mouth, letting out a long, rhythmic dragon roar towards the towering dragon cliff 60 to 70 kilometers away. A moment later, an even louder dragon roar came from the towering dragon cliff. All right, the chief has agreed to see you. Come with me. Following a storm of sand and pebbles, the green dragon, Feral, once again rose into the sky with great difficulty. The grade 4 holy paladin Olus, who was clad in golden armor, hit his chest hard. His body twisted and expanded strangely, quickly transforming into a green dragon that was even more majestic than Feral. With a series of resonant dragon roars, the two green dragons flew towards the distant dragon cliff one after the other. Compared to the boundless forest outside the valley, there weren't many tall, ancient trees in the valley. This place was covered in lush green grassland and dotted with lakes that were like the stars in the sky, adding to the beautiful and magnificent scenery of paradise. As they flew closer and closer, the towering and majestic dragon cliff finally revealed its full appearance. This was a towering cliff that occupied an area of thousands of acres. The steep cliffs were filled with pitch-black caves. Sensing Willis's arrival, the green dragon's long, malevolent head poked out of the caves, letting out loud dragon roars to greet them. The green dragon that Willis had transformed and also responded with a loud dragon roar. For a moment, the dragon roars shook the heavens above and below the dragon cliff. On the green grass at the bottom of the cliff, a group of green dragon whelps that were only 3 to 5 meters tall were playing beside the clear lake. From time to time, they would flap their small wings and move their round bodies into the sky with difficulty, then dive into the lake. There were also some whelps that playfully chased behind the herbivores, driving them away in all directions. It could be seen that these whelps were still not proficient in spitting out poisonous fog. Therefore, there were always some clumsy fellows that flew too low and couldn't control their bodies properly. They crashed into the grass, then crawled there and cried. Every time this happened, 1 or 2 majestic green dragon parents would fly out of the dragon cliff's cave, dive down, and skillfully use their dragon claws to pierce through the herbivores' bodies, then throw them to the side of the whelps. Therefore, a group of whelps swarmed up, either spitting out poisonous fog or spitting green saliva. When their prey was poisoned to death, they would happily pounce on it, using their newly grown sharp fangs to tear at the flesh of their prey. This bloody and cruel scene was so warm and sweet in the eyes of Willis, who was also a green dragon. As a half-dragon, the blood flowing in his veins was the noble, giant dragon bloodline. The Green Dragon Chief, Lin, received Willis in the conference hall. Located in the middle of the high cliff, this wide hall could accommodate 20 to 30 giant dragons. Therefore, it was the most important sacred place on the dragon cliff apart from the dragon altar at the top of the cliff. Usually, only when there were important and difficult matters, Chief Lin would gather the giant dragons here for a meeting. Therefore, when Willis transformed into his human form and walked into the conference hall, an ominous feeling rose in his heart. There were 3 giant dragons waiting here. The Green Dragon Chief, Lin, and the Green Dragon Elders, Sung and Vadim. All of them had the terrifying strength of a Type 4 Divine Warrior. "Welcome, my child." The Green Dragon Chief, Lin's loud voice caused the hall to buzz. "I hope you brought us good news this time." "What kind of good news does Father need?" Willis asked in a low voice. "We smelled the aura of evil sorcerers on Lee Santa, who you sent back. I hope your visit this time is not related to this." Lin crouched down, his ferocious head approaching Willis, who was only a little more than 2 meters tall, his huge amber eyes staring at him without blinking. "Great Father, I may have brought you news that you do not wish to hear." A pained expression appeared on Willis's face. "His Majesty the Human King asked me to bring you a message. He hopes that the powerful Dragon Cliff can send the giant dragons to reinforce the front lines on account of their years of worship. It is said that the war there is not going well. The sorcerers are holed up in the Greenland forest, causing great casualties to the demon hunters." "Then what is your attitude?" Lin's ferocious face was expressionless. "My child." Chapter 2:16. Relis and the other 2 green dragons looked at each other, and a loud voice sounded once more. "You've disappointed me, my child. As a half-dragon who grew up in a greenhouse, you've never experienced the bloody and cruel planar wars. Do you think that by relying on your dragon bloodline to reach rank 4, you'll be able to do as you please in this plane? Wrong, you're wrong." Relis angrily straightened his dragon body and roared loudly. "Tier 4 is nothing at all. In this plane, a rank 4 can only be considered a qualified recruit in a planar war. What is it that is attacking this time? Magi, evil magi. I'm sure you've heard of the cruelty of the magi. Now that the evil magi have set their sights on this pitiful plane, do you think there's a need for us to participate in this war just for some insignificant human offerings?" Facing the interrogation of his father, the mighty leader of the Green Dragons, Lin, Willis's face revealed a pained and conflicted expression. But my father, the Magi that have invaded this plane are still very weak. If we gather all the clansmen in the Dragon Valley, there's still a possibility of driving them out." "Huh, my child, you're too childish. Staying in this peaceful and warm material plane for a long time has limited your thoughts to the narrow vision of a human reptile. So what if you've repelled the invading Magi? The invading Magus family might just be a small organization. Once their invasion fails, they'll sell the coordinates of your world to other organizations. At that time, the ones who will invade this world might be an even stronger Magus organization. We, the great dragons, have dealt with the evil sorcerers in countless planes. Their greed and cruelty are rarely seen even in a few of the more powerful planes. If we were strong enough, we could naturally seal them out of our territory once and for all. But we don't. We're just an insignificant green dragon branch of the Emerald Dragon clan in the Dragon Plane. Even if we gather the strength of our entire clan and fight to the death with them, it'll still be of no use. The growth of a dragon can be calculated in thousands of years. Before our new members can grow up, a new batch of invading magi will appear. When the coordinates of this world were revealed to the evil magi, the fate of this world was already sealed. Willis closed his eyes in pain. As the descendant of the Green Dragon tribe's leader Lin and a certain human native girl, Willis had the mixed bloodline of a half-human, half-dragon. On one hand, he was a citizen of the Dragon Valley. On the other hand, he was the supreme leader of all the demon hunters in the human kingdom. He was also the most trusted right-hand man of the human king. Now, he had come bearing the trust of His Majesty the King, but it was difficult to convince his stubborn and conservative green dragon father. Thus, he was stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the pain and struggle in his heart was indescribable. "Father, I know you have no feelings for those humans, but now your son has come from 1,000 miles away to make the most sincere request to you. Are you willing to let him return empty-handed? Please save the people and living beings in this plane." In the face of Willis's emotional attack, Raislin, the leader of the Green Dragons, was clearly in a dilemma. He loudly argued with the two elders, and the atmosphere was very tense. Finally, Raislin turned around and yelled at Willis, "I respect your choice. Since you are willing to fight for the humans, then you can choose to leave. If there are dragons in the Dragon Valley who are willing to travel with you, I will not force them. Remember, the embrace of the Dragon Valley will always be open for you. When you feel tired outside, I will still welcome you back. Now you can leave." Hearing his father's reply, Willis nodded painfully and turned to leave the conference hall. A moment later, Willis's impassioned declaration of war rang in the sky above the dragon cliff. For a moment, the dragons were in an uproar. Half a day later, Willis led the 3 green dragons across the sky and disappeared into the horizon. Raislin, the leader of the Green Dragons, who had used the ultimate transformation spell to transform into a human, stood in front of the huge hole in the conference hall. He stared at the silhouettes of the giant dragons from afar and asked softly, "Sung, is our choice right or wrong?" Elder Singe, who was also a level 4 green dragon, came to its side. His huge dragon eyes, which were filled with vicissitudes of life, flashed with the light of wisdom. "I've tried my best to predict this countless times. The leader of the sorcerers this time is a terrifying level 6 sorcerer. With the strength of the green dragons, it is impossible for us to fight against him. Even if we go all out, we can only delay the destruction of this plane for 1 or 200 years at most. But such an outcome is meaningless to our green dragon race. Unless you can get reinforcements from the higher race of the green dragons, the emerald dragons, we can only accompany the destruction of this plane." I only said the future scene that I saw through the dragon altar. This is also the most common possibility among the many future scenes. As for the specific choice, it is up to you, leader. After all, the fate of more than 40 people in the Dragon Valley depends on you. Raislin was dejected. It had been 13 days since the last battle. The demon-hunting knights who had retreated from the forest abandoned the camp and led the team back to the vicinity of Blue Hill City. The sorcerers who had just fought a bloody battle heaved a sigh of relief. Taking advantage of this rare opportunity to rest, a large number of sorcerers swarmed into the depths of the forest and began to hunt the jungle creatures, as well as cook wizard beasts on a large scale. Some sorcerers with special methods were also sent to the vicinity of Blue Hill City, harassing the knights' camp day and night. Grimm, on the other hand, took this opportunity to hide in his underground palace and conduct all kinds of secret research. Just a few days ago, the 3rd batch of reinforcements arrived. This time, only 2 sorcerers came, a man and a woman, 2 level 3 sorcerers. Their arrival immediately made the sorcerers' camp full of confidence. The next day, the wizard tower that had been stagnant for many days resumed construction. At this point, the simple illusory barrier could no longer conceal the existence of the Wizard Tower of War. If the other party sent more dragon knights, they would be able to clearly see the tall wizard tower as soon as they entered the Greenland forest. The 2 level 3 sorcerers stayed in the camp to slowly adapt to the changes in the laws of this plane, while the rest of the sorcerers were busy with their own things. Grimm had also successfully obtained the information he wanted from Wizard Hyde. A list of the rune masters in the night plane. Unfortunately, almost all the rune masters were located near the faraway capital of the Kingdom of Knights, and they were under strict protection. Therefore, if Grimm wanted to get a glimpse of the profound knowledge of the fusion of rune energy and life energy in this plane, he would have to make a long journey. With the current situation, it was not realistic for him to leave the sorcerer's camp and travel to the native human world. At least until the end of the next war, Grimm could not leave the sorcerer's camp. Although the previous battle in the forest had hurt the demon hunter knights to the bone, after half a month of recuperation, coupled with the rush of new blood from all over the world, the knights' camp outside Blue Hill City was once again overcrowded. The number of demon hunter knights had also reached an unprecedented number of 5,000. Therefore, during this period of time, war drums were once again rumbling around the Greenland forest. The higher-ups of the knights offered high rewards to the bounty hunters, adventurers, mercenaries, and even some low-level thieves, turning the Greenland forest into a bustling market. Every day, countless small human exploration teams traveled through the forest, playing cat and mouse with the evil wizards, terrifying wizard beasts, and terrifying ghouls. Although most of the teams never returned and became ingredients for the wizards to create humanoid wizard beasts, there were still some that slipped through the net. Piecemeal information brought back by the wizards allowed the higher-ups of the knights to vaguely grasp some information about the forest. Among them, the existence of the wizard's pagoda was hard to hide, and thus became a thorn in the side of the higher-ups of the knights. If not for the fact that the higher-ups of the knights had not arrived yet, a new war might have already begun. Under such a serious situation, Grimm opened up an underground palace 7 miles away from the camp. Using a large number of earth demon puppets and demon crocodile hunters, Grimm dug out a small underground palace that occupied an area of 5 acres, then transformed it into his own laboratory and immersed himself in it every day. There were about 20 stone chambers in the underground palace, and an important wizard experiment was being conducted in every stone chamber. There were 4 to 5 fluorescent stones on the dark and damp stone walls, and with the help of their faint green glow, they could barely light up the surrounding area. Grimm appeared in the corridor with a heavy robe draped over his shoulders. After a moment's hesitation, he turned around and entered the first stone chamber on the left. In the empty stone chamber, there was only a large icicle placed on a stone platform in the middle, and there was nothing else. But even this icicle, which would take 3 people to wrap their arms around, was clearly not an ordinary item. It was precisely because of its existence that the temperature in the stone chamber was shockingly low, minus 157 degrees Celsius. The entire stone chamber was covered in frost, and even the floor, ceiling, and walls were covered in sparkling blue frost. If the stone walls had not been strengthened and protected by a wizard formation, Grimm was sure that the cold air would have seeped out of the stone chamber and turned the entire underground palace into a world of ice and snow. The only thing Grimm could do in the stone chamber was to stand in front of the icicle and use his elemental fire to continuously burn it. He would then slowly sense the traces of law energy released by the icicle after it melted. Yes, this icicle was a remnant of the battle between the Tier 2 Wizard Forgan and the Tier 2 Radiant Knight. In order to capture the Radiant Knight alive, Forgan did not hesitate to use the law energy to condense an icicle and freeze the Radiant Knight inside. Hence, this icicle was a manifestation of the law of ice. If not for Grimm's burning, the icicle might have automatically absorbed the water elemental energy in the surroundings to maintain its existence. Even if it eventually dissipated, it would only happen in a month or 2. During that time, any living creature that came into contact with it would suffer frost damage of up to 30 degrees Celsius. This was equivalent to an all-out attack from an advanced apprentice. Chapter 217. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Grimm used his elemental flames to melt away a thin layer of the icicle. He was the one who did the hard work, but the one who meticulously analyzed the composition of the icicle was the AI chip. After all, in terms of data collection and analysis, the AI chip was 10 times, no, 100 times stronger than him. This was still due to the limitations of his weak spiritual force. As his spiritual force grew, the AI chip's abilities would be amplified. Hence, Grimm put aside his thoughts of competing with the AI chip and focused on melting the icicle bit by bit. He then carefully analyzed the composition of the ice crystals, the characteristics of the arrangement of the spiritual elements, as well as the form of fusion between the spiritual and material elements. Among them, Grimm could sense the presence of spiritual elements everywhere. In his previous understanding, material was material, elemental was elemental, and spiritual force was spiritual force. The three of them existed in different forms, had different characteristics, and operated in completely different ways. However, after analyzing the icicle in front of him, Grimm painfully discovered that his previous understanding of these matters had been broken. The three did not seem to be independent entities that could not be fused together. In Grimm's understanding, material was the visible form of the material world. From the soil, firewood, and rivers to the mountains and seas, they were all part of the material world and could be touched by the human senses. Hence, material was the foundation of the material world. In this aspect, the earth of his previous life was no different from this other world. On the other hand, the elements were a mysterious substance that could not be seen or touched. They were everywhere, at all times, like a boundless ocean that soaked the entire multiverse in it, rising and falling. From the perspective of the multiverse, the elements were balanced. However, if one looked at it from a certain point of view, the elements also had the phenomenon of tides. More or less thick or thin, they were all different. The diversity of the material world was actually directly related to the density of the elemental particles it was in. In this aspect, there was a fundamental difference between the earth of his previous life and this other world. In the history of his previous life, there had been many gods, and there were also many mysterious ancient myths and legends. Those ancient gods and immortals seemed to be able to overturn rivers and seas and were omnipotent. However, the earth of his later life had deprived them of this mysterious ability. If it was in the past, Grimm would only treat these rumors of ancient earth as the delusions and dreams of the ancients. But now he didn't think so. Perhaps it was highly possible that the ancient earth was also a world filled with elemental energy. That was why the people of that era had the ability to transcend their weak physical bodies and control even greater power. However, as the elemental tide changed, the elemental energy on Earth began to fade. Therefore, humans were beaten back to their original state. They could only abandon mysticism and pick up the weapon of technology again. That was why the mysterious elements were the masterminds behind the changes in the material plane. So what exactly were elements? It was impossible for ordinary people to detect the elemental particles with their naked eyes. Even if you were immersed in it day and night, with countless elemental particles flowing in and out with every breath you took, you didn't have the means to directly sense and verify its existence. The only way for humans to come into contact with the elemental particles was through meditation, using the spirit as a bridge to carry out meditation, allowing the physical body to come into contact with the ethereal elemental particles. It was precisely because of the existence of elemental particles that the spirit became a kind of power. If ordinary people stared and stamped their feet, nothing would happen. Their weak power could not change the material plane in the slightest. However, if a great wizard stared and stamped his feet, the elemental particles that his spirit attracted would become a kind of power that could pry open the laws of the plane and the laws of the world, changing the color of the heavens and the earth, and changing the course of rivers in the past. Grimm had made a clear distinction between the three and had drawn a detailed boundary for them. But now, when he vaguely sensed the existence of the spirit elements in the ice pillar, his knowledge of the past inevitably cracked. He was very lucky to have successfully completed the elemental transformation of his body with the help of the flame scepter during his apprenticeship. This made his control over the fire elemental particles even more exquisite, allowing him to quickly become a powerful fire wizard as soon as he became a wizard. Many books had mentioned the term elemental transformation of the spirit in regards to the subsequent path of advancement. However, there was no detailed information on how to elemental transformation of the spirit, and it was even left blank. Grimm had once suspected that this was a way for Magus families to monopolize knowledge and gather talents. For Grade 1 Magi, the only way for them to continue improving was to join these families with ancient Magi inheritances and obtain the lost knowledge from them. Otherwise, they could only waste their time year after year, slowly groping their way out of the endless darkness. Although Magi had a long lifespan compared to mortals, their lives were still limited when it came to the endless search for Magi knowledge. Logically speaking, Grimm had just advanced to become an elemental magus, and he would probably spend the first 100 years consolidating his body in elemental transformation. He would only touch on the matter of elemental transformation after 100 years. However, he had already completed his body of fire, and was now worrying about elemental transformation 100 years in advance. Hence, it was rare for him to have a chance to interact with the spirit elements, so of course he would spare no effort in exploring it. Grimm's elemental affinity was towards fire elemental particles, while the Grade 2 Forgan's affinity was towards ice elemental particles. The huge difference in their attributes allowed Grimm to feel the backlash of the plane's ice law when he extended his mental strength into the ice elemental essence he had released after the ice pillar had melted. When he held the ice pillar with both hands and slowly burned it with elemental fire, a bone-chilling force of ice appeared on his body through the bridge of his spiritual force. When he released his hands to end his daily probing, Grimm's legs were already frozen in place. Even the slightest movement would cause ice crystals to continuously fall from his body. Apart from these external injuries, his spiritual force had also become sluggish. It was obvious that his fire innate talent was being suppressed by the power of ice. This was only the aftermath of a spell cast by a Grade 2 Ice Magus, but it was already able to suppress his fire innate talent. If Lord Forgan's opponent was not a Grade 2 knight, but him, Grimm might not even be able to complete a complete spell before turning into an Iceman. Grade 1 Elemental Magi could only use their physical body to adapt to the elemental particles and use their spiritual force to guide them. What about Grade 2 Elemental Magi? What do they look like when they cast spells? These questions were hard to answer. Grimm could not help but let out a long sigh. It feels like I'm dissecting a Grade 2 Magus right now. Immediately after, he became vigilant and kept his mouth shut, looking left and right. Grimm heaved a sigh of relief when he found himself in the underground labyrinth that he had dug. At the same time, he warned himself that in this strange world, being cautious was the only way for the weak to protect themselves. After coming out of the first stone chamber, Grimm quickly entered the second stone chamber. On the stone platform here, a tall human figure with his chest open was lying on his back. Every secret part of his body had been seen without a doubt. The stone platform itself had been modified by Grimm into a special spell formation. It was slowly transmitting various elemental energies into the different organs of the human body. What Grimm needed to do every day was to constantly observe and record the effects of different elemental energies on the organs of the human body. After all, the person being dissected on the stone bed was a Magus Knight. In the Magus world, he would be considered a Magus. In the Magus world, if Grimm dared to openly dissect a Magus, he would definitely be hunted down by the entire Magus community. It was only in this foreign world that he had the opportunity to capture a Magus of the same rank as himself and dismember him like a lab rat without worrying about any repercussions. Even some of the more secretive and taboo research was permitted. This was perhaps what attracted Magi the most about the Planar Wars. The stone platform in the third secret room was densely packed with broken pieces of armor and some other indiscernible items. In the middle of the stone platform, the outline of a knight's armor had already been pieced together, and the rune formation inside could be seen clearly. After so many bloody battles in the forest, the Magi had killed and captured a certain number of magic hunters and Magus Knights. Hence, they had a basic understanding of the special runes of this plane. On the whole, the knowledge of runes in the Night Plane was far inferior to that of the Magus world. However, when it came to the integration of runes and the human body, they had their own unique insights and progress. If they could snatch this knowledge and modify it a little, it would undoubtedly allow magi, who controlled powerful elemental energy, to have the same powerful physical strength as knights. This would also increase the magi's battle prowess, and it was a new piece of information that made people drool. However, the rune fragments that Grimm had collected were only at the level of a Magus Knight. There was not much information that could be used for reference. Hence, Grimm could only use quantity to replace quality. He collected all sorts of rune formations in an attempt to rely on the AI chip's powerful data analysis and deduction abilities to see through the mysteries of higher runes. Chapter 218. Blue Hill City. A large number of demon hunter knights gathered here, turning it into a bustling military camp. Knowing that he could not compete with the demon hunter knights, Count Winlier, the governor of Blue Hill City, simply gave up his mansion and moved to the Rose Manor outside the city, living a life of seclusion. But out of admiration for the demon hunter knights, he held some salon balls in the manor every few days and warmly invited the young knights to attend. In order to attract these young knights, Count Winlier even invited the most famous chefs from Hiduran City, as well as many noble ladies and beautiful women in Blue Hill City. Every day, they would sing and dance, living a luxurious and happy life, enjoying delicious food and wine, surrounded by coquettish ladies, and listening to the flattery of rich merchants and nobles. Those noble knights who had just experienced the bloody battle in the forest seemed to have found the meaning of life once again. They were completely immersed in a life of pleasure, leading a befuddled and dreamy life. And Duke was one of them, born in a small noble family. He had the great dream of riding a magic colt and traveling the world with a sword since he was a child. His father, a small baron in the countryside, sold his only small manor and sent him to the training camp of trainee demon hunter knights. Not only did he successfully become a demon hunter knight, but after 15 years of arduous training, he unexpectedly became a magic breaker knight. With that, he immediately became the pride of the entire family and the famous leader of the local demon hunters. The success of killing evil people made him a firm defender of the demon hunter knights, and he also became a devout believer of the great holy knight Willis. Therefore, when the new evil war broke out, he also came here with his companions and joined the demon hunter knights last time. A cruel and bloody forest battle made him see for the first time the horror of evil wizards. Every time he recalled the evil wizard beasts that swarmed like tides in the dark forest, and his poor companions that mutated into ugly ghouls, his heart would bleed, and his soul would tremble. The first few nights after returning from the forest, he woke up from terrible nightmares every day, drenched in cold sweat and depressed. Almost all the knights who returned with him suffered the same sequelae as him. Because of this, when Count Winlier held a lavish banquet and invited the knights to attend, the higher-ups of the knights who heard the news not only did not stop them, but also happily sent the traumatized knights over. Perhaps the broken faith of the knights could be compensated with wine and food, and perhaps the defeat on the battlefield could be won back in bed. In the spacious and bright banquet hall, there were handsome men and beautiful women seeking pleasure everywhere. Even the elderly were dressed immaculately, looking elegant and graceful. Most of the beautiful ladies were wearing gorgeous low-cut dresses, revealing their snow-white backs and deep ravines on their chests. The men, on the other hand, were wearing exquisite aristocratic dresses or free and easy hunting suits. From time to time, they would hold goblets of wine and chat loudly or invite the ladies to dance. Waiters in well-ironed uniforms pushed silver dining carts and placed exquisite food on a long table covered with a sky-blue tablecloth. This was for people of a certain status and position to enjoy. The table was filled with brass candlesticks, pewter cutlery, and horn goblets with silver rings. Beautiful waitresses with flower-like smiles shuttled between the distinguished guests with silver trays, serving glasses of wine to the guests who were drinking to their heart's content. At the edge of the hall, there was a small band playing hard. From time to time, some bards and dancers would sing and dance impromptu, further igniting the atmosphere in the banquet hall. Outside the banquet hall, there were elegant and quiet corridors, parlors, arbors, fountains, lawns, and other places where men and women could have a heart-to-heart talk. Behind a banquet hall, there were small bedrooms that were specially partitioned. Not only were the decorations luxurious, but more importantly, the soundproofing was first class. However, in this joyous moment of feasting, in a secret wine cellar in a corner of the manor, several dark figures were secretly gathered together, discussing something in low voices. Has the target been chosen? His lordship is getting impatient. Please report back to His Majesty. The target has been chosen. There are a total of 3 magic-breaking nights. Tonight, we will find a way to keep them here when that time comes. You must be careful. It was not easy to ambush you. His Majesty does not want you to be exposed too early, so you must be careful and arrange things carefully. Yes, Lord Vulture, don't worry. Yes. In the darkness, the few dark figures whispered to each other, and soon went their separate ways. One of them suddenly turned into a furry shadow, flapping its wings soundlessly as it quickly passed through the shadows of the manor's many buildings. Soon, it came to an exquisite standalone 2-story building at the back of the manor. Through an air vent left at the corner of the house, the black shadow entered the house, and then transformed into a slightly bald nobleman wearing an exquisite nightgown in the master bedroom. As he gently pulled on a special thread at the corner of the room, the 2 doors on the side of the master bedroom opened. A group of beautiful maids quickly walked in and quickly helped the nobleman change into a luxurious suit. The butler in a tuxedo also stood respectfully at the side, quietly waiting for the count's orders. Have all the guests arrived? The nobleman raised his arms, allowing the maids to tidy up his attire as he asked with a nasal aristocratic tone. Yes, everyone is here. I've already sent people to take care of the few that you specifically ordered. The butler quickly stepped forward and replied softly. Where is Duke now? Just half an hour ago, he was chatting with the chairman of the Wade Merchant Group in the front hall, and now he's happily chatting with the sisters at the grapevines in the parlor. Where's Burrell? 15 minutes ago, he was dancing with Madame Chevalier in the front hall, and now he's in guest room 7. Where's Drysec? He's been drinking with Knight Thomas and Knight Raoul in the side hall, and it's said that he's already drunk 6 bottles of grape wine. I've already sent another 5 bottles. You've done well. The nobleman nodded in satisfaction. Just as the nobleman was about to step into the front hall, the respectful butler suddenly pulled him back. Master, I have another piece of news to report to you. Oh, what news? The nobleman asked in surprise. Knight Collier is here? Collier? You mean the Knight of Radiance, Collier? The nobleman was shocked, and he blurted out. He then lowered his head and smiled sinisterly, and without hesitation strode out. Since even the Knight of Radiance had come, there was no reason for him, the master, to not show up. Moments later, a banquet attendant announced loudly outside the door. Count Winlier has arrived. Countless black shadows swayed, and countless wizard beasts roared. Under the flickering light of the torches, the crowd ran at high speed. Their heavy panting could be heard clearly. Crimson clouds of fire rolled in the sky, and meteorites wrapped in scorching flames fell from the sky. Every time they fell, it was accompanied by a violent roar and blinding flames. Then the forest started to tremble. Every time this happened, even Duke couldn't help but shiver along with the forest, because what followed was a terrifying shockwave of flames and a blanket of tree debris, mud, and debris. The meteorites that exploded in the sky would turn into a rain of fire, engulfing the entire forest. The only thing Duke could do was to put up an energy shield and use it to block the rain of fire. Amidst the tremors, he ran with all his might, and ran with all his might. Suddenly, an ugly and nauseating pale monster leaped out from the bushes by the roadside, pouncing on the demon hunter knight in front of Duke, and started gnawing on him. When Duke raised his ruined sword with trembling hands, the The ghouls suddenly looked up at him, crouched down, and leaped high into the air, pouncing on him viciously. Looking at the terrifying fangs rapidly enlarging in front of him, Duke screamed and woke up from his nightmare. He sat up on the bed. The two naked ladies on the bed murmured a few words, turned over, and fell into a deep sleep. Duke wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and looked around the room. Only then did he realize that he was no longer in the terrifying battlefield, but in a warm nest. Duke couldn't help but smile as he recalled the crazy and charming moments of the first half of the night. He raised his head and wanted to lie back into the embrace of the beauty. But for some reason, he had a vague feeling that something dangerous was lurking around him. But after enjoying himself with wine and beauties, even his consciousness and sensitivity to danger had fallen to the lowest point. Just as he was at a loss and did not know where this strange fear came from, two red lights suddenly lit up in the darkness of the room. The red lights appeared very suddenly, and without him realizing it, they had already arrived in front of him and instantly attracted his attention. For some reason, when Duke's gaze landed on the red lights, his thoughts stopped moving. Even though he felt something was wrong, his willpower that had been weakened by multiple methods could not withstand the invasion of the red lights. Duke's face showed a painful expression, but he could not shift his gaze away from the red lights. As the strange fluctuations appeared in the red light, his mind sank deeper and deeper, and the expression on his face became calmer and calmer. Finally, he became completely silent. "All right, Blood Lady, this guy is under my control. It's all up to you now." In the darkness, a sweet female voice rang out. Thank you, Lady Phantom. When we get back, I will send the things you want to you as soon as possible. There are two more that I need to trouble you with." Mary's voice also rang out in the darkness. The female wizard named Phantom left the room, leaving the poor prey, whose mind and spirit had been enchanted by the illusion, to Mary. For a long time, Mary only had a group of quasi-sorcerer vampires in Blue Hill City. She had never successfully tested it on a powerful demon hunter knight, not to mention a magic-breaking knight with a higher willpower and magic resistance. So, taking advantage of this great opportunity, Mary paid a huge price to hire Phantom to help her break the defense of the magic-breaking knights and shake their willpower. This way, even if Mary's embrace failed, under the cover of the illusion, the magic-breaking knights would only see it as a new kind of nightmare and would not easily expose the secret of the Rose Manor. Chapter 219. Inside a hidden crypt at the edge of the Greenland forest. Tangled bushes covered the narrow entrance tightly. A black-shelled, green-winged carrion beetle with liver mortis spots on its back flew close to the top of the tall grass. Its 4 pairs of blade-like appendages were still impaling a dead human on its body. Judging from the human's attire and appearance, it should be a low-level mercenary who had entered the Greenland forest for a bounty. The carrion beetle circled around the entrance, and when it did not find anything out of the ordinary, it retracted its wings and landed near the entrance of the crypt. Soon, it dragged the mercenary's body into the crypt, and there was no longer any movement. After entering the crypt, the carrion beetle had to go through a winding and narrow tunnel to reach a giant crypt 20 meters below the ground. The crypt had become a giant hive. The ground and the walls were covered with a strange fungal carpet. It was soft to the touch, and one could step on it, but it was unusually tough and had a strong resistance to acid and corrosive toxins. At the center of the crypt were more than 10 mounds of earth that looked like ant hills. However, the material used to build them wasn't ordinary earth, but rather the filthy substance formed from the mixture of human flesh and dregs, wood shavings, and wet soil. The surface of the mounds was densely packed with dark holes, and upon closer inspection, one could vaguely see the strange larvae wriggling inside. Although they were only larvae, their ear-piercing screeches, ugly appearance, and short but terrifying form were all signs that they were terrible creatures that the world could not tolerate. The carrion beetle that flew and hovered in the air above the crypt, and when it flew above one of the hives, its sickle-like appendages moved wildly. The human mercenary's body was immediately torn into pieces, and warm blood was poured onto the hive. Smelling the fresh blood, the larvae in the hive immediately screeched agitatedly, poking out their translucent white heads from the holes, crazily devouring the flesh and blood residue at the mouth of the crypt. The rest of the insect nest that didn't get any food let out even more ear-piercing hisses, causing the entire cave to be so noisy that people almost couldn't hear them. As the carrion beetles moved in and out of the nest, the fresh blood from the water rack continued to water them. Finally, the larvae dug a hole in one of the nests. More than 20 carrion beetle larvae crawled out, crawling on the creep carpet to undergo their first important evolution. Their milky white, translucent shells began to solidify and harden as soon as they came into contact with the damp and cold air. Following a series of terrifying cracking sounds, a crack gradually appeared on their backs that ran through the entire spine and slowly expanded to both sides. When the crack widened to a certain extent, a ferocious insect head suddenly poked out from inside and let out the first metallic screech towards this icy cold world. In a dark forest dozens of miles away, the demonic worm Intich was looking coldly at a human mercenary team that was advancing cautiously through the mottled shadows of the trees. As if he had heard the buzzing sounds coming from afar, Intich suddenly turned around and flashed a sinister smile in the direction of the nest. Within the wizard camp, the War Wizard's Tower was growing at an alarming speed. In just a dozen days, the War Wizard's Tower, which was 213 meters tall and had 2 levels underground and 7 levels above ground, had already been completed. It was now in the 10th stage of modifying the wizard's spells. After all, the simple War Wizard's Tower did not use any special, valuable stone materials. Instead, it only used the most ordinary mountain rocks and loose gravel solidified by wizard spells. Such a material would definitely not be able to withstand the harsh tests of war. Just the terrifying weight of the wizard's pagoda was enough to crush the foundation at the bottom of the wizard's pagoda into dust, much less a large-scale attack from the battle techniques of the knights. Thus, as the wizard's pagoda grew taller, a dozen wizards had been carving sturdy wizard formations on every giant stone slab of the wizard's pagoda day and night to increase the carrying capacity of these stones. Furthermore, these temporary wizard formations could not hinder the overall defense of the wizard's pagoda. Thus, the position where each wizard formation should be carved and how they should intersect with each other might seem simple, but it was not something that any wizard could accomplish. Other than the construction of the War Wizard's Pagoda, the busiest place in the camp was the Wizard Beast Synthesis Laboratory. Large groups of wild beasts from the forest were sent back to the camp from afar. Within an hour, they would turn into wizard beasts of all shapes and sizes, swarming into the forest in groups of 3 to 5. The protection of the perimeter of the camp was handed over to the elite ghouls. Each of them had abilities no weaker than a high-level apprentice. They were a group of tireless sentries, hiding in the bushes, or treetops. Any living being with the scent of a human would not be able to get within 3 miles of the camp. Other than these regular troops, there were also a few wizards with strange abilities active at the edge of the forest, monitoring the movements around them day and night. Those who would recklessly barge into the forest for a bit of bounty and land never stepped out of the forest again. In the previous battle, the thing that caused the greatest damage to the large group of magic knights was the plague bacteria. It was precisely because of the existence of the bacteria that could corrode, ruin energy and magic cults that the magic hunters became pitiful foot soldiers, losing the advantage of being able to roam the forest like the wind. Of course, such an effective thing had to be put to good use. After a period of improvement and cultivation, a more contagious plague toadstool had been created and passed to the spies in Blue Hill City through secret means. If it was not to avoid provoking the other party to make a move in advance, with the means of the wizards, Blue Hill City would have become a dead city with graves everywhere. In the camp outside Blue Hill City, the number of magic hunters was growing rapidly every day. It seemed that the powerful forces behind this plane had realized the danger of the wizards and were frantically hoarding the strongest forces. Furthermore, through secret channels, the Magus camp had also received news that the strongest person in this plane, the Grade 4 Holy Knight Willis, had already invited reinforcements from the mysterious Dragon Valley and was rushing over here day and night. It could be imagined that the moment he arrived here, it would be the moment when all the magic hunters would come out of their nest. Therefore, what the higher-ups of both sides could do was to constantly strengthen their own strength and consolidate their advantages. The two camps of magic hunters and wizards were like two madly accelerating chariots, approaching each other at a terrifying speed. Perhaps in the next second, they would collide head-on without holding back. As for who would win and who would lose, no one knew. The only thing that was known was that this was destined to be a war of life and death. 21 days had passed since the bloody battle in the forest. On a sunny afternoon, the opportunity for the war had silently arrived. Grimm, who was quietly conducting his witchcraft laboratory in the underground labyrinth, suddenly had a thought and took out a communication crystal from his pocket. The crystal was flashing with a blinding light. Grimm's spirit penetrated it, and Forgan's cold and harsh voice immediately rang in his mind. All wizards, return to camp immediately. All wizards, return to camp immediately. Those who do not return within an hour will be executed as traitors. Also, Crow, Plague, and Blood Lady continue to hide according to the original plan and await further orders. The war had finally arrived. Grimm's heart sank. No Magus dared to guarantee their own safety in a planar war of this scale. Even Lord Forgan, who was a calm commander, had a high chance of dying here. After all, once the war started, he would definitely become the target of the other plane's experts. As for the two level 3 wizards, even though they had been here for some time, they had never stepped out of the War Wizard's Pagoda. Who knew how much power they could unleash under the powerful suppression of the plane? After all, a level 1 wizard would need a day and a night to completely adapt to the laws of the plane, while a level 2 wizard would need 5 to 7 days. How long would it take for a powerful wizard to become a level 3 wizard? Filled with doubts, Grimm hastily packed up everything in the underground labyrinth and left with a flame leap. In various parts of the forest, a few wizards who were busy with their own tasks received Lord Forgan's message. They hurriedly abandoned their work and ran towards the direction of the camp. After receiving the message, the demonic worm Endic did not rush back, instead rushing to the area where the crypt was. When his figure, hidden under a heavy robe, appeared at the entrance of the crypt, a strange sound came from within. Following that, one by one, sinister-looking carrion beetles crawled out of the crypt and gathered around Endic. They raised their heads and let out sharp hisses. Endic's head, hidden under the shadow of his hood, also let out sharp hisses, as if communicating with the group of carrion beetles. 39 carrion beetles. Every single one of them had terrifying strength, no weaker than a quasi-wizard. If they were to gather into an army, all the rank 1 magi would have no choice but to flee for their lives. Sweeping his gaze across the loyal insect soldiers around him, Entic finally felt a sense of exaltation in his heart. Damn Mary, damn Grimm, now that my army of bugs has taken shape, let's see what else you can compare to me with. With a tinge of satisfaction in his heart, Entic strode toward the camp. The black-shelled, green-winged carrion beetles soared into the sky, their wings flapping rapidly as they flew above the treetops. They were like a giant dark cloud, following closely behind Endic. In the sky, some were sitting on giant, flying magical creatures. Some had green wings of wind on their backs. Some had transformed into ferocious beasts and were running wildly. In an instant, the wizards scattered throughout the forest were all rushing towards the same place. Chapter 220. Outside Blue Hill City, Rose Manor. Sensing the abnormality outside, Mary gently moved to the huge floor-to-ceiling window in the room, lifted a corner of the curtain, and looked at the small black dots in the distant sky. Before they arrived, the surging and vast dragon aura had already surged over. Dragon aura was a mysterious thing that could not be seen or touched, but its impact on ordinary creatures was real and hard to avoid. Ordinary warhorses and even domesticated livestock, whenever they sensed the dragon aura that filled the sky like a tidal wave, would be frightened, violent, and easily angered. And when they sniffed the stench of the powerful dragon-type creature in the wind, their hooves would tremble and they would collapse to the ground, unable to move at all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Mary's scarlet eyes flickered slightly, and she almost instantly saw everything that the black dots in the distance represented. But as the number continued to increase, Mary's beautiful eyebrows could not help but knit together. Damn it, there are 5 dragons. This battle is not going to be easy. Just as she hesitated, the wind howled above Rose Manor, and 5 dragons flew across the sky toward Blue Hill City not far away. Mary saw it more clearly this time. Among the 5 dragons, there were 2 level 3 and 3 level 2 dragons. And on the dragons' backs, there were 4 human knights in strange armor. Judging from their appearance, this should be the level 4 Holy Knight and the 3 level 3 Dragon Knights. This kind of strength was enough to crush the wizard camp on the surface. And at this moment, from various hidden areas in Blue Hill City, countless pairs of eyes were staring at this arrogant and domineering flying team as they landed next to the camp far away outside the city. Soon, the news spread to the wizard camp. And so, the scene of the level 2 Lord Forgan summoning the wizards back happened. Just as a few wizards hiding near Blue Hill City were still speculating whether these high-level knights would take a short break before choosing to march, the Demon Hunter camp in the distance suddenly erupted. Teams of Demon Hunter knights mounted their magic colts, packed their belongings, and rushed out of the camp in a neat formation, advancing as fast as the wind toward the distant Greenland forest. So decisive, it seemed like the enemy had come prepared. The spies couldn't help but think to themselves. The huge dragons soared into the sky again and circled around in the sky. They raised their necks and let out earth-shattering dragon roars. Amidst the rolling thunder, they quickly caught up to the vanguard and rushed into the lush forest with them. Riding on the back of the level 3 green dragon, Feral, Willis had just flown into the Greenland forest when he saw the terrifying war wizard's pagoda standing tall in the vast forest. This war wizard tower was so majestic that even the tall ancient trees looked like tiny specks in front of a giant in front of it. Looking at it from dozens of miles away, the vast sea of trees could only cover its insignificant base, and the towering spire seemed to be able to touch the floating clouds in the sky. There was no need for the illumination of the magic spell. Just this tall tower alone was enough to shake people's souls. Was this the base that the evil sorcerers had planted here? It was indeed as awe-inspiring as described in the historical records. Observing the war wizard's pagoda from afar, Willis did not advance recklessly with a few dragon knights. Instead, he chose to stay in the air above the forest where the vanguard of the Demon Hunter Knights were, clearly guiding them in the right direction. In the previous countless battles in the forest, the Demon Hunter Knights had never reached the lair of the evil sorcerers. One of the reasons was that the Greenland forest was lush with lush foliage. Coupled with the rugged terrain and endless mountain ranges, the Demon Hunter Knights, who did not have an advantage in the air, could only charge around aimlessly in the forest. Of course, there was no efficiency to speak of in such battles. Hence, most of the battles in the past were initiated by the sorcerers, and each time, the knights would suffer horrifying damage. Now, with the giant dragon leading the way in the sky, the army of knights stretched out from the forest like an agile snake. They crossed over mountains, leaped high and low, crossed countless streams, climbed countless cliffs, and headed straight for the heart of the evil sorcerer without hesitation. Strangely, perhaps they knew that the entanglement at the periphery had lost its real meaning in this battle. Hence, the sorcerers did not engage in positional warfare with the Demon Hunter Knights like they did in the past. Instead, they chose to withdraw all of their forces within a 5-mile radius of the high tower, forming a defensive formation that made one frown. Furthermore, the defensive formation only faced the Demon Hunter Knights. There did not seem to be any abnormalities in the other three directions. Was it because the enemy was not strong enough to fully defend themselves? Or was it a diversion? Willis stood on the back of the huge dragon, deep in thought. Even though he had the intention of instructing the Demon Hunter Knights to take a longer route and attack the enemy's weak spots through the gaps. But he gave up on that idea after a moment's thought. Who knew if there were really no ambushes in those gaps? Rather than taking the risk of stepping on landmines, it was better to collide with the enemy head-on, then use the bravery and absolute numbers of the knights to crush all of the enemy's preparations. He no longer cared about any casualties in today's battle. As long as he could chase this bunch of terrifying evil sorcerers away, it would be worth it even if he had to sacrifice his team of 6,000 Demon Hunter Knights here. 6,000 Demon Hunter Knights. This was probably 80% of all the Demon Hunter Knights in this realm. If all of them were to die here, no matter how powerful the Kingdom of Knights was, it would still be unbearable and painful. It was easy to die, but it would take at least 200 to 300 years to nurture them again. That was why only he, the leader of the Knights, and the 3 Dragon Knights knew how determined Willis was. As for the Radiant Knights, they only had the right to obey his orders. With the demonic colts on their backs, a long line of Demon Hunter Knights quickly approached the front line. Finally, at an area 2 miles away from the enemy's defensive formation, Willis directed the Green Dragon to land on a high cliff, stopping the speeding troops. The Demon Hunter Knights, who had been running for 2 hours, dismounted and rested. They began to eat and drink as they prepared for the impending battle. With a few huge dragons in the sky acting as flying sentries, the Demon Hunter Knights no longer had to worry about being ambushed by the evil sorcerers. 6,000 Demon Hunter Knights forming a long line might not be that eye-catching, but once they were entrenched together, it was a sea of people. But once they gathered together, it was still a sea of people. Demon Hunter Knights could be seen everywhere within a 2-mile radius of the clearing in the forest. Suddenly, the knights stopped in the sky above the densest part of the forest. Dark clouds rolled, and a terrifying thunderstorm was about to take shape. The Demon Hunter Knights, who were shrouded by the dark clouds, hurriedly mounted their demonic colts, planning to scatter to avoid the terrifying sorcery that was about to erupt. The green dragons, circling in the sky, discovered the evil sorcerer's hiding place almost instantly. They first pulled themselves up, then suddenly swooped down, using their terrifying dragon breath to overturn the location of the abnormal spiritual wave in the blink of an eye. The Thunderbird was indeed the fastest sorcerer in terms of mobility. Realizing that it had been targeted by the dragons, it immediately came out of the dense forest, and, with a flash of lightning, it had already escaped the dragon's attack range. Streaks of terrifying dragon breath plowed through the sky above the forest. The previously lush forest had instantly turned into a land of death where all living things had withered. The green ancient trees, vines, and thorny bushes were all corroded by the green poisonous fog in the next second, and then shriveled into dry, dead things. The flying speed of the dragons in the sky was very fast, and with just a slight dive, they were already close to the defensive position that the sorcerers had set up. When the strong and agile bodies of the 4 green dragons streaked through the forest, countless terrifying sorcery of different colors shot up from the ground, chasing after their tails. In the next second, the 4 green dragons once again demonstrated to the world how the dragons could become the overlords of all the planes in the sky. Their agile bodies could be seen quickly rolling and coiling in the air, with the sorcery that was tightly locked onto them, drawing countless colorful streaks of light in the sky. Every time they rolled and coiled, some sorcery would collide and automatically explode into fireworks behind them. When the sorcery behind them was no longer a concern, the green dragons nimbly turned around and annihilated the last few sorcery with a thick green dragon breath. Accompanied by loud dragon roars, the green dragons proudly soared into the blue sky, once again showing off their beautiful figures in the sky without a scratch. If it was not for fear of damaging the morale of his side, Grimm would not have been able to help but applaud the performance of the green dragons. What did it mean to be the overlord of the sky? What did it mean to be the ruler of the creatures of the plain? This was the naked display of the great power of the dragons. For those who still had unrealistic fantasies of slaying dragons, just by looking at the performance of the dragons, it was enough to understand the huge gap in strength between them and the dragons that was difficult to make up for. Compared to the dragons, the sorcerers were like a group of people who only knew how to stand there and cast sorcery. When it came to flexibility and effectiveness in battle, the dragons were more than 10 streets ahead of the sorcerers. However, most of the sorcerers did not care about this. Compared to the monsters in the material plane, the sorcerer's casting ability was not that outstanding. But in the sorcerer world, the sorcerers firmly occupied the dominance of the plane. Chapter 2:21. None of the Magi hiding in the shadows of the forest felt the slightest bit of fear in the face of a group of fearsome green dragons. Their gazes towards the green dragons became even more fervent. One of the dragon pets was just as eye-catching as others had described. Perhaps the dragon's actions had angered him, but a magus slowly rose from the forest 2 miles away from the dragons and confronted them from afar. He had an aged face and was dressed in a black robe. In his hand was a long staff that was enshrouded in a strong, magical glow. It was the only Grade 2 magus in the magus camp, Forgan. A mere Tier 2 sorcerer was no threat to a group of adult green dragons. After all, even the weakest among them had the strength of a Grade 2 magus. Dragons had always dominated the material plane with their powerful flying abilities and strong physiques. They could easily fight enemies of a higher rank than them, let alone a human magus of the same rank who was known for his weak physique. A young green dragon, who had left the Dragon Valley for the first time and participated in a planar war, roared and rushed out of the group. Judging from the way it roared at its companions, it seemed like it wanted to fight this Grade 2 magus who had appeared out of nowhere. A few green dragons roared in the sky in unison, and the huge sound waves caused the sea of trees to ripple. Due to their thirst for glory, the other green dragons did not stop the young green dragon. Instead, they cheered loudly in the dragon language. The young green dragon became even more excited and violent. First, it flapped its wings and slowly raised its body. When its aura was brewed to the extreme, it raised its neck and let out a loud and clear dragon roar that tore through the clouds. Then, it dived down at high speed toward the unremarkable and weak enemy. This was a terrifying creature that was 12 meters long and 6 meters tall when stretched out. Bowl-sized, dark green dragon scales covered its entire body, shining brightly under the bright sunlight. The dragon's head was 2 meters long, and light green, poisonous smoke shrouded its nose and the front of its huge mouth, making it look even more mysterious and terrifying. When the huge mouth opened and closed, one could vaguely see the terrifying ball of acid that had condensed in its throat. The huge and ferocious spikes extended from the back of its neck all the way to the end of its long tail. When the pair of wide and finely scaled wings flapped quickly, a strong gust of wind lingered around its elegant and perfect body. Green Dragon, a young green dragon that had just passed the infancy stage and was just about to enter the mature stage. Perhaps its strength was only at Grade 2, but when it displayed its strong body with smooth lines in front of everyone, its grade was no longer that important. The Tier 2 green dragon let out a frightening dragon roar as it descended from the sky like a green meteor. It swooped down with unstoppable force towards the Tier 2 Grand Magus, Forgan, who stood proudly in the sky. Willis, who had landed in the forest far away and was commanding the knights to gather, suddenly had an ominous premonition. His companion's recklessness and restlessness made him frown deeply, but after scanning the surroundings of the battlefield, he really couldn't find anything that fell off. This caused him to be even more irritated. The green dragon was diving down. The distance between them was closing. In the blink of an eye, the green dragon was less than 100 meters away from the hateful human wizard. Seeing that the humans still had no intention of dodging, the green dragon's huge amber eyes revealed a trace of disdain. With its rich experience in hunting in the forest, it had already thought of countless ways to deal with the situation as it dived down. If the human magus dodged to the left or right, the moment it brushed past him, it would swing its head and engulf his body with a terrifying dragon breath. If it dodged in the right direction, it only needed to lower its body slightly, and its thick and sharp dragon claws would instantly pierce through the weak defensive barrier of the human magus, tearing him to pieces. As for directly colliding with the green dragon, even those monsters that were known for their strong bodies wouldn't dare to be so arrogant. However, the human magus in front of it was doing something that exceeded its expectations. Just as the terrifying green dragon was diving towards him at high speed, he was still calmly chanting a spell. Even the loud dragon roar could not drown out the sonorous and forceful incantations of the spell. A ray of green light was shot into the forest below Forgan. In the blink of an eye, the tranquil forest suddenly came to life. Terrifying green vines as thick as a water tank shot up into the sky and quickly wrapped around the body of the diving green dragon, pulling it towards the ground. The vines were covered with terrifying wooden spikes that flashed with a metallic luster. As the vines tightened, they viciously bit into the scales of the green dragon, producing a piercing noise. Caught off guard, the green dragon could no longer control its flying posture. Like a falling meteor, it plunged into the dense forest. A huge pillar of dust and a terrifying shockwave appeared in everyone's field of vision. The forest within 100 meters of where the green dragon landed was immediately destroyed by this terrifying force. Countless broken trunks, branches, and splinters of wood shot out in all directions under the impact of the violent shockwave, causing the surrounding forest to ripple and the leaves to fall like rain. The Grade 2 green dragon shook its head in pain as it crawled out of the huge crater. Countless magi revealed themselves in the forest beside it, and terrifying spells rained down on it. The green dragon angrily stood up and spread its wings to escape from this group of despicable enemies. However, the lower part of its body suddenly tightened. Countless thick green vines drilled out of the ground and quickly spread over its body, firmly locking it in place. In the next second, amidst the green dragon's furious and frightened roar, the violent sacrificial explosion engulfed its body. The green dragon's magic resistance was indeed outstanding, but still had its limits. Faced with so many terrifying attacks, even with the green dragon's thick skin, it could not help but let out a mournful cry. Knowing that the green dragon's magic resistance was high, the magi that came to surround it did not use pure elemental spells. Instead, they leaned towards mixed spells. Dark red fireballs, lava fireballs, violent sound waves, and distorted space all began to wreak havoc on the green dragon's body. The huge dragon's scales were blown to pieces, and the flesh underneath was quickly corroded by the terrifying waves of spells. Just as the green dragon was frantically fighting against the waves of spells and the green vines, a few fellows rushed out from the forest to take advantage of the situation. There was a bloodthirsty demonic wolf whose fur had rotted and darkened, a terrifying berserk ape with bloodshot eyes that did not fear death, a slender vampire bat that screeched strangely, and 7 or 8 strange beetles with livor mortis spots on their backs and green wings. These wizard beasts took advantage of the time when the green vines entangled the green dragon and braved the Magi's fierce attacks to pounce on the green dragon's body, frantically gnawing on the exposed flesh. The pain of being bitten by thousands of insects made the green dragon wish it was dead. It opened its mouth, and a continuous stream of terrifying green poisonous fog engulfed its body. The corrosive poisonous fog killed a large number of enemies in an instant. All the wizard beasts that were enveloped by the poisonous fog dissolved into a sticky green liquid, as if they had been thrown into a pool of acid. Even their hard bones could not be preserved. The fragile vampire derivatives bore the brunt of the attack. Once they came into contact with the poisonous fog, they shrieked in pain and turned into a puddle of green liquid. However, the strange beetles did not seem to care about the rank 2 green dragon's poisonous breath at all. They continued to gnaw on the green dragon's flesh. The green vines also seemed to have a high resistance to corrosion, so they were not destroyed by the green dragon's breath. The green dragon was enraged to the extreme. Its body, which was riddled with holes, struggled desperately in the entanglement of the vines. Its bone dragon tail, which was like a huge meteor hammer, swept across and finally smashed a strange beetle into minced meat. Strange, sharp insect hisses sounded in the forest. Many of the beetles seemed to have received some sort of instruction, and they all crawled to the green dragon's abdomen and began to gnaw on it with all their might. This position was not bad. With the green dragon's huge body, it was really hard to attack this part of the body when it was inconvenient to move. Resonant dragon roars sounded one after another, and the sky was filled with the green dragon's huge body in an instant. With the dragon knight on its back, the other 3 green dragons swooped down like sharp arrows, as if they were trying to save their comrades. Wizard Forgan, who was still standing on top of the trees, waved his magic staff. Thick green vines shot up into the sky from the nearby forest, wrapping around the green dragons. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 3 blinding suns suddenly lit up on the green dragon's back. The violent and condensed energy blades swept down and collided with the green vines. The vines could withstand the green dragon's strong acid breath, but they could not withstand the ferocious sword aura of the rank 3 dragon knight. In an instant, they were cut into pieces. Taking advantage of the green vine's temporary retreat, the 3 dragon knights slashed at the trapped green dragon's body a few more times. The vines that were sticking out from the ground were immediately cut down. The green dragon broke free from its bindings in anger. It used its big mouth to force away the enemies around it, and with all its might, it leapt up into the sky. Unfortunately, the dragon's heavily damaged wings could no longer support it in the sky. Its left wing was already bent and drooped by its side, unable to extend. The tip of its right talon was also missing a section, and there were a few large holes in its membrane. The injuries on its chest, ribs, and lower abdomen were especially serious. Most of its scales were gone, and the flesh below was a bloody mess. Through the missing flesh, one could see the green dragon's thick tendons and white bones. With such a serious injury, it was obvious that it could no longer fly. After struggling a few times in the air, the green dragon fell down with a howl. A green dragon with an even larger body swooped down, braving the waves of witchcraft that soared into the sky. It extended its thick and solid hind claws and grabbed its companion's body. It flapped its wings with all its might and flew higher and higher with difficulty. The dragon knights soared on the green dragon's back, danced in the air, and streaks of beautiful flame blades slashed out, annihilating the oncoming witchcraft in the terrifying sword light. But even so, the berserk sorcery that escaped still caused the 2 green dragons to groan. If it weren't for the fact that their scales and skin had the same resistance to magic, they would have been knocked out of the sky by the wizards long ago. 2 thick green breaths engulfed the nearby forest, and the other 2 dragon knights rode their green dragons to help. The evil wizards hurriedly dodged the green dragon's terrifying breath and the dragon knight's frightening sword light, finally reducing the burden on the 2 green dragons. Chapter 222. In the first round of battle, it looked like neither side had lost any members, but the knights had clearly lost a large force. Willis was furious at his green dragon companion's injuries, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. He waved his hand, and the team of demon hunter knights, who had already gotten into formation in the forest, slowly advanced. He would return the humiliation and damage the wizards had inflicted on him tenfold, no, 100-fold. And the price the enemies had to pay was their lives. Willis could already tell that there were not many wizards on the other side, no more than 20 of them, and most of them were low-level wizards. There was not a single high-level wizard that Willis felt respect for. If the enemy only had this much power, he would not even need the team of Demon Hunter Knights to lead the charge. He would just need to lead the Dragon Knights, and they might be able to wipe out this group of evil wizards. But for some reason, he would feel an indescribable fear every time he saw the giant wizard's pagoda not far away through the mottled shadows of the trees. It was as if there was a terrifying demon there with its mouth wide open, waiting for him to come to it. It was because of this fear that Willis forcefully recalled the green dragons and ordered the Demon Hunter Knights to attack instead. If the enemy really had any terrifying traps at the wizard's pagoda, the 6,000 Demon Hunter Knights would be able to flush them out. And all Willis had to do was lead the team of green dragons to deal the most lethal blow to the enemy once they revealed their ugly bodies. The team of green dragons were the daggers that could slice the enemy's throat, while the Demon Hunter Knights were the hammers that could break through the enemy's hard shell. He was very clear about this. 11 burly Radiant Knights appeared at the front of the team. Each of their bodies was surrounded by a strong energy light. They would be the first to launch the fiercest charge against the enemy. As for the 98 Spellbreaker Knights, they were in groups of 2. Behind each group was a team of 100 Demon Hunter Knights. In the dense forest, there was no flat path for them to charge forward. However, squads of knights in bright armor lowered their visors and slowly advanced forward on their magic colts. The majestic aura of thousands of people made all the wizards who witnessed this scene feel a little fearful. The knights had already begun to pick up speed. Wizard Forgan gently rubbed the snake-eye ring on his left pinky as he watched the Iron Knights approaching step by step. He then ordered coldly, "Activate the plague plan." As the order was issued, mysterious ripples began to spread in the forest. Wherever the ripples swept through, the Demon Hunter Knights and their demonic colts became restless. Some of the demon colts even began to jump and scream in a frenzy, throwing off the riders on their backs. The demon colts weren't normal, but the knights weren't any better. One by one, the demon hunters clutched their throats tightly, panting in pain. Their internal organs felt like they were on fire. The burning was unbearable. For a moment, the entire Demon Hunter squad was affected, and there were Demon Hunter Knights writhing in pain everywhere. The muscles on Willis's face began to twitch violently. Damn it, this isn't witchcraft. This is a conspiracy. With the Demon Hunter Knights' extraordinarily strong bodies and magic resistance, no witchcraft would be able to enter their bodies without them noticing. At a glance, more than half of the 6,000 Demon Hunter Knights were showing strong reactions. This could only mean that the evil wizard had already done something to their bodies. In order to do this, Willis could only think of doing it in the military camp's food or drinking water. These idiots, they didn't even realize it. Willis glared angrily at Windsoul, the leader of the Radiant Knights, and pulled out the giant sword from his waist. He sat on the back of the green dragon, O Feral, and roared loudly. "Sweep away the darkness, show mercy to the weak, and be fearless. Today is the day we die gloriously for the beliefs of the knights. Charge! Charge! Charge!" It was very strange. As Willis roared the motto that the Demon Hunter Knights always believed in, his body began to emit a faint golden light that was hard to detect. Wherever the light passed, it was like a strong, dispelling halo, and the surrounding Demon Hunter Knights instantly returned to normal. The Demon Hunter Knights, who were freed from pain and confusion, did not have elemental vision, and naturally could not see the golden light. Instead, they thought that their sudden recovery was the power of the Knights' beliefs, and so they all pulled out their rune-long swords and chanted the Knights' motto loudly as they surged forward with all their might. As more and more Demon Hunter Knights joined in the chant, the golden light began to ripple on everyone's body, forming a thick golden armor. The Demon Hunter Knights, who were triggered by the mysterious ripple, actually managed to kill off most of the plague bacteria with the help of the golden light and recovered their combat strength. Even if there were any remaining plague bacteria, They were suppressed deep within their bodies and could not attack. Bastard, what is this? Chanting a few chants can stop the plague bacteria? How are we going to fight the rest of the battle? At this moment, countless wizards were roaring madly in their hearts. Only Wizard Forgan squinted his eyes and looked coldly at the golden sea of holy light, chanting angrily in his heart, "The power of faith. Damn it, it's the power of faith." He finally understood why the Tier 4 Willis was called a holy knight. It turned out that he had already grasped the basics of how to use the power of faith and could bring it to the battlefield. Just like the elemental power that wizards often used, the power of faith was also a form of power, and in terms of power level, it was obviously higher than elemental power. If the elemental power was just the gathering of a large number of elemental particles and using mental strength as a constraint, then it would be easy to understand. The power of faith, on the other hand, was a lot more illusory. It originated from the human heart, and when every heart sincerely believed in a certain idea as the embodiment of that idea, it would naturally gather an inexplicable power. Even if it was just an ordinary wooden statue, if enough people believed in it, there would be an inexplicable power gathered on it, and it would have some inexplicable power that outsiders could not understand. At this moment, the Tier 4 Holy Knight, as the beacon of faith of all the Demon Hunter Knights, had obviously become the object of their devotion. Hence, when he loudly chanted the Knight's Maxim, it also ignited the fire in the hearts of all the Demon Hunter Knights. Hence, the power of faith that had accumulated over the years spread throughout the battlefield, and naturally, the Demon Hunter Knights recovered without needing any medicine and regained their battle strength. Regarding all of this, Wizard Forgan could naturally come up with the most logical explanation with his profound knowledge of wizardry, but the Demon Hunter Knights had no idea. Perhaps the ignorant were fearless, or perhaps only a closed heart was pure enough. Hence, the Demon Hunter Knights saw this as a miracle of the great Holy Knight. Hence, the burning faith in the knights in their hearts grew stronger and stronger. Raising their rune swords high up, fiery red and icy blue rune energy quickly spreading on the swords, teams of Demon Hunter Knights roared as they charged toward the War Wizard Tower. Damn it, I have to find a way to eliminate the power of faith of these knights. Otherwise, these guys with the power of faith would be like a group of knights buffed with top-notch energy shields. Even if all the wizards were to come out, they would not be able to defend against their ferocious attacks. As he roared in his heart, Wizard Forgan spun the Snake Eye Ring and sent a message to someone far away. "It's all up to you. Think of a way to block the knights. The family will pay you back double the price for all the losses caused. Do it." Grim, who had been hiding in the forest all this while, could only shake his head with a bitter smile when he received Forgan's message. If he did not put in some effort in today's epic battle, the wizard camp might not be able to protect itself. Once the camp was destroyed, who knew if these foreign wizards would have the chance to return to their family's demiplane? If they could not return, even Grim could not help but feel a chill down his spine at the thought of being hunted down by hordes of Demon Hunter Knights. Forget it. I'll give it my all for once. Grim made up his mind, his hands reaching into his robes, and he continuously tossed out sparkling magic puppet summoning essence crystals. As the dense earth elemental particles quickly gathered, a giant yellow smoke rose from the area where he was standing. This earth elemental wave was so strong that even the Holy Knight Willis, who was holding the line at the back of the team, couldn't help but raise his head and look over. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy footsteps sounded from within the yellow smoke, and one by one, the earth puppets that were as tall as a human sprinted out of the smoke and rushed towards the team of Demon Hunter Knights. If there were only a dozen or so elemental puppets, it wouldn't be a big deal. However, the yellow smoke was expanding, and more earth puppets were rushing out. Even some wizards who had disdain in their eyes turned serious. How did this guy manage to control so many elemental puppets at one time? What surprised everyone even more was that as the yellow smoke ball trembled violently, a thick python made entirely of rocks popped its head out and slithered out quickly. Looking at its huge body, which was as thick as a water tank, and feeling the slight tremble of the ground, everyone frowned. But this was not the end. 1, 2, 3. When 5 rock pythons slithered out of the smoke and followed behind the earth puppets into the battlefield, all the demon hunter knights could not help but feel nervous. Chapter 223. The clash that he expected did not happen. Grimm was not stupid enough to use his earth golem to fight against the demon hunter knights, and he would not do such a stupid thing. If they were earth golems, Grimm would not mind watching the clash of steel and rock. But forget about the earth golems. One by one, the earth puppets had already sunk into the ground before they could even touch the demon hunters. Then, mud pillars that were half the height of a human and as thick as a child's arm rose from the ground and lined the path of the demon hunters in an orderly manner. The demon hunter knights were indeed the pinnacle of combat power in this plane. Each and every one of them possessed superior riding skills and agility than an ordinary person. They commanded the demon colts beneath them to jump high and low, sometimes even leaping up from the tall ancient trees to avoid the obstacles of the mud pillars. On the other hand, the Radiant Knights and the Magic Breaker Knights who occupied the front of the team unleashed their flame blades and frost blades with all their might, destroying all obstacles in their way. Faced with such a strong enemy, the earth golems in charge of blocking the path could only change their tactics and use a large area of mud to block the way. Patches of mud pillars, stone forests, patches of quicksand swamps. Although the earth demon puppets didn't kill any of the demon hunters, they effectively delayed and hindered their advance. While the demon hunters were in chaos, the earth golems emerged from the forest from time to time, throwing mud spears and small area of effect earth spears to attack the enemy. The battlefield was filled with small skirmishes between the earth golems and the demon hunters. The aggressive attacks of the earth golems also disrupted the orderly formation of the demon hunters, turning the battlefield into countless small, chaotic battle circles. Unfortunately, the attacks of the earth golems were weak. Their mud spears could not penetrate the golden armor of the demon hunters. Instead, some of the earth golems that could not escape underground in time were chopped into pieces by the demon hunters that charged at them. Almost 100 earth golems were reduced at a speed visible to the naked eye. The only earth golems that could be killed were the 5 rock pythons. Every time they drilled out of the ground, they would spit sand and stones and bite ferociously, causing the demon hunters to lose their horses. No matter how powerful the armor of faith was, it could not withstand the weight of a rock python that weighed more than 10 tons. All the demon hunters that were targeted by the rock python were turned into a pile of bloody paste. However, every time the rock python charged into the battlefield, its thick body would be chopped into pieces by the berserk knight's battle techniques, and rocks would shatter into pieces. Once the damage was severe, the rock python could only dive into the ground and wait for its body to automatically regenerate. Most of the time, these rock pythons with the strength of advanced or quasi-sorcerers could only mess up the enemy's battle line. It was unrealistic to expect them to kill the demon hunters on a large scale. After Grimm released all his stock, he handed over the command of the magic puppets to the AI chip in his mind. With the AI chip's superior view of the battlefield, as well as its meticulous and dynamic commands, although the number of magic puppets was decreasing, they were still able to restrain the entire army of knights. With the help of the AI chip, Grimm no longer needed to spend so much effort controlling the hundreds of consciousness nodes. He only needed to focus on the Grand Pyromancer title. Grimm roamed freely on the battlefield. He had transformed into a terrifying 3-meter-tall Balrog. Elemental flames were spewing out from his body as he slowly walked on the battlefield. Wherever he passed, the soft black soil would be baked into semi-molten lava. A path of black and red lava could be clearly seen. Grimm held the flame scepter in his right hand and the secret voodoo scroll in his left. He flipped the pages of the ancient voodoo scroll in his hand, adding a sense of mystery to the scroll. Grimm did not want to use the 6 instantaneous spells stored in the secret voodoo scroll. In order to maximize his combat power, he had replaced the 6 instantaneous spells with the terrifying Molten Core, Flaming Storm, and other large-scale fire elemental spells. Using them to attack the demon hunters? To be honest, Grimm did not want to use them. Grimm moved slowly as he waved the flame scepter in his hand, throwing lava fireballs at the densest area of the demon hunters. As for those who dared to charge at him, Grimm would blast them into pieces with a barrage of fireballs. The armor of faith might be able to help them resist simple witchcraft attacks, but against the incessant barrage of fireballs, even the thickest armor would be of no use. The demon hunters who were charging forward while chanting the knight's motto were blasted to the ground by the sudden explosion of fireballs. Before they could get up from the ground, follow-up fireballs flew over, breaking through their armor of faith in a way that stacked damage, blowing up the armor on their bodies, and engulfing their bodies with a raging, scorching tide of flames. After all, the demon hunters were made of flesh and blood. Without the protection of energy and armor, their excellent magic resistance was a joke in the face of the violent fireballs. The fireballs exploded, and blood and flesh splattered everywhere. The demon hunter knights who were engulfed by the chain fireballs could not escape from the area of the flames. Their bodies, along with their demonic cults, would be blasted into unrecognizable pieces of flesh and blood in a matter of seconds. Most of the rune arrows that they fired back were blocked by Grimm's lava shield. Ever since Grimm's defensive spells were upgraded from the fire shield to the flame shield, and now the lava shield, his defensive power had increased to an unimaginable level. Until now, it was impossible to destroy the lava shield in one go without an attack of more than 150 degrees. As for the attacks below 150 degrees, although they would still cause some damage to the lava shield, Grimm continued to inject his mental strength into the lava shield, and the lava shield was quickly repaired. That was why the lava shield around Grimm's body was full of rune arrows when the battle started, but it still could not stop it from working. Occasionally, the rune arrows that managed to get past the lava shield would not be able to penetrate Grimm's thick lava shield. The rune arrows that were spewing out from Grimm's body were roasted until they were almost white. Then they softened like hot wax, and finally turned into a puddle of molten iron. As for the demon hunter knights who tried to engage him in melee combat, Grimm responded with a flaming whip. The flame whip, which was made of pure high-temperature flames, would leave a scorch mark wherever it hit. If one got entangled by the flame whip, their flesh and blood would be ignited in the next second. Although Grimm was an elemental sorcerer, when he transformed into a Balrog, his combat power was comparable to that of an abyssal Balrog. If he was far away, he would bombard the enemy with fireballs. If he was close, he would use the flame whip, and if he got any closer, he would switch to a giant flaming sword. A 3-meter-tall flame man, wielding a giant flaming sword made of flames and lava, would be enough to chop down a large group of people, even without the help of martial arts. Not to mention touching such a tyrannical weapon. Even if one were to get a little closer, one would be able to feel the oppressive pressure and the burning sensation of the world. Moreover, Grimm's 30-meter-wide flame barrier was a domain-type spell. Any living creature that entered within 30 meters of him would suffer 13 points of fire damage per second. This also meant that an unarmed human would die in less than 2 seconds in Grimm's flame barrier. Although the demon hunters were slightly better, they could only last for 27 seconds at most. That was with the help of the armor of faith. Otherwise, the time would be halved. Therefore, under Grimm's powerful attacks, wherever he went, there were demon hunters struggling in pain. Behind him, there were piles of demon hunters that were blasted into charcoal. Of course, Grimm's unscrupulous slaughter had angered the Radiant Knights who led the team. One by one, they slapped their demon colts, raised their rune swords that were as bright as torches, and roared as they charged towards him. Grimm had no intention of fighting the Radiant Knights. Whenever this happened, he would pause for a moment, and with a burst of magical flames, his tall, flaming body would disappear without a trace. Of course, in the next second, the terrifying Balrog would appear in another area 100 meters away. The wind breath monster was overseeing the entire situation, and the earth golem was joking around. The entire chaotic battlefield was as clear as an unfolded book in Grimm's mind. Not a single change in any battlefield or individual within a 3-kilometer radius could escape his all-encompassing spiritual senses. At every moment, countless blurry information was being fed back to him from his consciousness. With the AI chip's massive data filtering and analysis, Grimm was able to clearly grasp the situation around him, allowing him to walk on the most optimal path. There were no Radiant Knights in the battlefield he was involved in, and he would not be surrounded by a large group of magic-breaking knights along the way. As for the demon hunters, who were crippled but determined, as long as they did not join forces, they would not pose a threat to Grimm. The battlefield was chaotic, and there were many magi who took the opportunity to sneak in and start a massacre. There was also a large number of earth golems and wizard beasts rampaging in the battlefield. The Radiant Knights, who wanted to find trouble with Grimm, chased after him for a while, but their attention was attracted by the new enemies, and they fell into a sudden battle. Chapter 224. Grimm shook his head as he looked at the Windsoul Knight, shrouded in dazzling energy. He then left with a flame leap. 100 meters away, in a sparse forest, more than 100 demon hunters under the leadership of 2 magic-breaking knights were killing a pack of wolf-shaped wizard beasts. The sudden explosion of a flame ring was right in the middle of them. Red light burst out, and the scene blurred and shook. Grimm had appeared in the field. When his vision stabilized, Grimm stood up straight and looked at the demon hunters riding on their magic colts. His face made of flames finally revealed a sinister smile. A faint red flame barrier shot out and quickly enveloped the surrounding area of 30 meters. All the trees, shrubs, vines, and other plants in the area began to wither and burn. Even the ground was scorched black. Thump, 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 the sound of the rune bow's bowstring could be heard. Rune arrows condensed with frost energy froze the lava shield into a blue ice shield. Occasionally, 3 or 4 rune arrows would penetrate through the gaps and hit Grimm's flaming body, leaving a flash of blue light in the midst of the crimson flames. Grimm roared and waved the flame scepter in his hand. First, he summoned a terrifying 10-meter-tall, giant fire spirit. Then, he lightly tapped the tip of the scepter and bombarded the area around him with violent lava fireballs. The valiant demon hunters weaved in and out of Grimm's surroundings. Every time they brushed past him, they would use their frost swords to leave eye-catching sword marks on Grimm's body or shield. However, they were met with violent and ferocious lava fireballs or chain fireballs. Grimm had also discovered that in the chaotic battlefield, there was no time or space for those so-called powerful spells to be used. When you found and locked on to an enemy with a high value for money, you would start to cast a powerful spell, such as Core Explosion. But by the time you were ready, you would awkwardly find that the enemy had already disappeared without a trace, or that the enemy in front of you had already been covered by another wave of enemies. Therefore, the only choice you had was to waste your powerful spells on some low-value trash. For magi who had to control every strand of their spiritual force consumption, this was intolerable. Although ordinary elemental fireballs were quick and could be cast with a thought, their damage was only 30 points. They could not effectively penetrate the armor of faith and knight's armor to deal enough damage to the enemy. Thus, after much selection, the swift and powerful lava fireball became Grimm's best choice for killing on the battlefield. The lava fireball itself had 45 points of fire elemental damage, and it also had 15 points of lava explosion damage. It also came with the bonus of sputtering lava in a 10-meter radius. Coupled with the 30% fire damage bonus that Grimm had gained after choosing specialization in fire, a simple and crude fire spell was turned into a powerful area of effect spell. If a demon hunter was directly hit by a lava fireball, the death rate would be 100%, and those who were caught within 10 meters of it had a 34% chance of dying. As for the Magic Breaker Knights, Although they were much stronger than the demon hunters, none of them dared to stand in the sea of fire and fight Grimm head-on. Grimm's Balrog transformation and fire barrier were too overbearing. The demon hunters did not dare to enter the area shrouded by the red halo. They could only fight back with their rune bows. Of the hundreds of knights, only 2 magic breaker knights led 4 to 5 fearless demon hunters to Grimm's side and fought him with all their might. The lava shield around his body could not withstand the attacks of the 2 magic-breaking knights, and finally exploded into pieces of lava that filled the sky. Grimm's body was also slashed by the demon hunters, leaving dozens of crisscrossing cracks on his body. Scorching flames and terrifying magma gushed out from the crevice, igniting a demon hunter knight who was standing beside Grimm. He cradled his scorched face, which was covered in blisters, and crawled on his demon colt. He screamed shrilly as he escaped from the battlefield. Grimm was groaning in pain. After all, after transforming into a Balrog, the lava and flames were like his flesh and blood. Even with his strong physique, he would not be able to withstand the continuous attacks. Grimm ordered the fiery djinn to self-destruct. Taking advantage of the fact that the enemies around him were stunned by the shockwave of the flames, Grimm quickly chanted a spell and killed a magic breaker knight with a powerful molten core explosion. Only then did he move to another location amidst the flames. This time, Grimm did not choose to rush into the crowd of demon hunters. Instead, he appeared in the forest beside a group of 300 demon hunters. The sudden explosion of the flame halo was so dazzling that it allowed Grimm to instantly receive a rain of frost arrows and 4 to 5 energy blades that were as dense as a swarm of locusts. The lava shield that Grimm had just formed was on the verge of collapsing. Grimm gritted his teeth and endured the attack. He waved his hand and summoned a new fiery djinn. He then raised his right hand and summoned a lava fireball the size of a wash basin and threw it at the group of demon hunters. Clearly, this group of knights was already prepared. A series of frost arrows and energy blades instantly smashed the fire djinn into pieces of flame. Even the lava fireball exploded in mid-air, exploding into a sea of fire that filled the sky. Grimm grunted. The voodoo scroll in his left hand flipped quickly and stopped at a page that contained the meteor shower spell. Grimm hesitated for a while, but he still could not bear to waste such a powerful spell on a group of demon hunters. He could only wait for the cooldown of the fiery leap spell and move to another location. In this chaotic battlefield, there were more than 1 or 2 wizards wandering around like Grimm, hunting for their prey. Every sorcerer who dared to roam the battlefield alone had a completely different fighting style and killing method. Among them, the ones that caught Grimm's attention were the demonic worms, puppets, and a few others. After not seeing him for a few days, the demonic worm in Tick's abilities had improved significantly. Apart from the common scorpions and flying insects that surrounded him, there was also a group of strange beetles that were half the height of a human with black shells and green wings. The black shells of these beetles were unusually tough. Even the glowing runic swords of the demon hunters could not damage them at all. All they could do was leave some shallow or deep marks on their shells. Only by continuously slashing at the same spot could the demon hunters penetrate their shells and cause them serious damage. On the other hand, these strange beetles only needed 2 or 3 companions to surround them, and they could easily kill and tear apart a demon hunter knight. Even the armor of faith around his body could not stop the beetle's sharp limbs from piercing him. Grimm saw with his own eyes a black beetle that was struck by the flame blade of the magic breaker knight. The beetle flipped a few times in the air before regaining its balance. Its carapace was not damaged at all. This meant that the black beetle's shells were more resistant to elemental or energy damage than physical damage. Carrion beetles. Who would have thought that Tick had nurtured them? Grimm frowned deeply as he looked at the 30 or so carrion beetles surrounding Tick. He began to think about how he could win if he were to encounter Tick. On the other side of the battlefield, 3 miles away, the sorcerer codenamed Puppet had also caught Grimm's attention. Although Puppet's movements were slow and rigid, he still maintained great mobility as he shuttled through the ancient trees. His battle style was not as wild and unrestrained as Grimm's. Instead, it was filled with an indescribable evil and viciousness. He would always hide in the trees and wait for a small number of demon hunter knights to pass by him. He would then use his evil puppet threads to control them. Not long after, he was surrounded by a team of 20 to 30 demon hunter knights. Then, he would order these puppet knights to attack the other demon hunters. What followed was a civil war between the knights. In the face of a familiar comrade and a struggling comrade, if the demon hunters showed the slightest bit of mercy, they would fall under the cruel blade of their comrade. However, it was clear that the success rate of Marionette's puppets controlling the magic-breaking knights was not high, and the number of puppets he could control was limited. Therefore, he did not attract as much attention as Grimm's Balrog transformation. The other person who caught Grimm's attention was the powerful Hyde. He was like a robot with metal tentacles all over his body. His body was covered in sharp, metallic tentacles that flickered with a metallic luster. Every demon hunter who stepped within 20 meters of him would be pierced by the needle-like spikes. These spikes that were enchanted with piercing spells were not something that ordinary armor could defend against. They danced in the air and were as nimble as giant metal snakes. They could launch terrifying piercing attacks from any angle around you. On the other hand, the demon hunter's runic longsword that was imbued with energy and aura slashed at the tentacle. Sparks flew everywhere, but it did not even scratch the tentacle. Whenever there were enough enemies around him, countless spinning blades would fly out of Hyde's body and form a terrifying blade barrier around him. The only thing that Hyde needed to do was to quickly move through the group of knights with this blade barrier. With a single charge, he could pierce through the entire team of knights, leaving behind a trail of flesh and blood filled with broken limbs. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.